Hello everyone and welcome to Bass Pro Shop's Outdoor World in Charlotte, North Carolina. We have a great season of shows spooled up and ready to go. And today, Ish Monroe is going to show us that Florida is popping with giant bass that live in, well, the nastiest, gnarliest jungle vegetation on planet Earth. That's coming up on In Depth. Then, I'm going to talk to you about picking the right speed reel for your style fishing in the zone. But first, Elite Series champion Ott Defoe is going to show us how current flow, even power plants, dictate how bass hold tight to cover. Coming up now in Fishing in 5.
This morning, coming up the highway, we decided to go to Old Hickory Lake, which is an impoundment on the Cumberland River. Decided to go up the river a little bit and fish near a plant. It used to be a coal-fired plant the last time I was here, but now it's a nuclear-powered plant, so it's a little bit different when you're fishing the kind of water that comes out of those two places. One of them can be really hot coming out of that coal plant. A nuclear plant, it's still going to have good current, but just not that temperature change that I was expecting. Can you hear that? That's that discharge right here. It's putting out some water. Let's see if we can catch some bass around it. Ended up, when we got in there and started fishing around, the temperature of the water coming out of the plant was actually cooler than that of the main river. And being that it's summertime, man, that was drawing those fish in there like a magnet. The area was just absolutely loaded with bait fish in there first thing this morning. There was bait flipping everywhere, and there were fish busting in them too, due to that water being 3 or 4 degrees cooler than the area around it. There's a fish. Just a little guy. I threw a topwater up there on that point and didn't get bit, but threw a crankbait up there and one grabbed it. There, buddy. It's a nice one to start the morning. The thing about fishing around a discharge is figuring out where that current's hitting and being able to maximize your potential there. You know that those fish are going to be related to that current, but hands down, the number one most important thing around a discharge is bait fish, and we've got a lot of it right here. See you, buddy. Another thing about the fish around the discharge is a lot of times they really get grouped up on very specific stuff. So once you find that fish, you catch one on a certain angle, make sure you make repetitive casts to that same spot. A lot of times you'll catch another one. That is a fish, that's a big one. Come here, buddy. Man, that fish there, dude, he slammed it good, but the deal is, I fished my worm through there, got a couple bites, didn't catch them, picked the crankbait back up, caught a white bass, caught a largemouth. Those fish are wanting to react to something right now. They're not wanting something slow, dragged on the bottom. They want a crankbait moving fast. See right now, right there is the reason the largemouth, the white bass, all that's in here. You see that's the threadfin shad. Even though the color may not be exactly what I'm using, the size is really, really close. You know, so that's what those fish are eating. They're keying in on those shad. They're flipping around all over the surface here. That's what those bass are eating right here. I must have landed right on his head. That's that drop shot. That's the same little high spot I've been catching them on the crankbait. They seem to have slowed down on it. I rigged me up a drop shot with a Berkley Havoc bottom hopper worm on it and got one to bite it. That's a great bait to follow up with a crankbait. When you're fishing a place like this and you know those fish are there but you just can't get them to keep biting, try a drop shot. A lot of times you will. And if you look in his throat, you can see a tail of one of those shad, just like that one that I caught earlier on the crankbait. Those fish are still there and they're still feeding. I've just got to change baits a little bit, and sometimes you can get them to bite again. All the bass that I've caught right here have been on a very specific place, except the first one. He was over here by himself. All the rest of them have come out of honestly where I would expect them to be. It's the piece of structure here that's getting the absolute most amount of current. When you're fishing a discharge, it's as if you're fishing a river all in itself in a confined area. So you really have to pick it apart, find those very specific little places where those fish are going to feed. It's just a little high spot right here in the middle that's got some really good hard bottom on it, and that's where those fish are set up. That current's washing out of there. It's washing those bait fish to them. The bass are actually sitting still. They're not roaming around. They're not moving a lot. The bass are there. They're letting the bait fish do the work, and that current's doing the work for them. Just pushing those bait around. Those bass sit still, wait on them to show up. That's when they eat them.
Florida strain bass have become famous for one thing, and that is being big. But there's two problems with that. Number one, they're incredibly intelligent. They're big for a reason. And number two, they live in the nastiest stuff on planet Earth. Ish Monroe is going to teach us how to catch one of those giants in today's In Depth. Got it. Oh. Woo.
Today we're fishing vegetation, and lots of it. Coming to a lake with vegetation in it means that there's probably a good population of bass. That's why I get excited when I come to places like this. You're gonna see flat reeds, round reed, you're gonna see some Kissimmee grass, hydrilla, which is one of my personal favorites, some lily pads. I mean, there's so many different types of vegetation out there. You just gotta find some and key in on it to catching bass. Vegetation usually tells you that you have a healthy lake, usually very good water quality. The vegetation will actually filter out a lot of the silt in the lake, and so then you get real clean water, which allows those fish easy access for feeding. When they can see a bait from far away, they can swim over there and eat it. Got all that grass with it. Thought it was bigger than that. Whew, but you can see all the vegetation. The one thing that you're going to find about a bass in vegetation is that he knows that there's always somewhat of a constant food source. A lot of the insects live on the grass, which then attracts the bait fish, which obviously the bait fish attract the bass. Yes. That one's back in the matted vegetation. Oh. That was a mixture of Kissimmee grass, alligator grass, blown in hydrilla. It's like a combination of a little bit of everything. And usually places like that hold bass because there's something there that they want. So if you can find a good mixture of everything, I mean, there's even a few lily pads around. So you've got 4 or 5 different types of grass here. And so that fish was kind of just sitting in, mixed in with that. Well, when you're looking at vegetation, say you're fishing, flat reeds or round reeds, or you're fishing some lily pads, and there's little points that come out, and I call those basically the ambush points. That's where the fish is going to sit to ambush the bait. Now, also, if you're fishing places like hydrilla or Kissimmee grass, and there's holes in it, then you want to make sure you pitch into those holes, because those holes are open areas where a bass can pop out into it, eat the bait, and swim back in. And then there's the matted vegetation, when they're hiding up underneath the blankets of the matted hydrilla or the matted Kissimmee grass, or the flat reeds are laying over and it's got that canopy there. Basically what you're doing is you're flipping right in the middle, because the biggest fish are going to sit in the heart of that, because that's where he's most comfortable. Made a little bit of move, fishing some of this offshore hydrilla. Basically it's just submerged hydrilla. Bass all over the country seem to really get into this stuff. Hydrilla is an excellent place to fish when a cold front comes through, because those fish will actually get into the hydrilla and sit there, and it wraps around their body like a blanket and it makes them comfortable. And so if you can present a bait to them, a lot of times they'll come underneath that blanket and go out and eat something. Oh, there's a good one. This one was sitting outside on the submerged grass. He just was probably just out here feeding, and that's what you get a lot of times in the submerged grass is they're feeding. But when they're not biting, sometimes you got to go to that matted vegetation, and you know that's where they're sitting there living. Hydrilla is excellent. I mean, hydrilla is my #1 choice when talking about vegetation. You can punch it when it's matted on top. You can punch it when it's underneath. You can throw a worm through it. You can fish a spinnerbait through it. Hydrilla is probably the one type of vegetation that you can fish any way that you want to fish. Oh, watch him come up to the top and eat it. See that little point that just come out there? I mean, when I say ambush points, we're talking about the smallest of points. I mean, you see that? There's a mixture of hydrilla and alligator grass right there. And it was just one little point that came out, and I reeled over the top of that point, and he just came up and ate it. Yeah, we're coming up to the arrowhead, and these arrowhead vegetation, when I used to come down to Florida, they used to call it break your arm grass, because they say you're in danger of getting your arm broke because big fish seem to really like the arrowheads. So I always try to spend a little time fishing it and keying in on it, you know, fishing the bases of the arrowheads, you know, with a Texas rigworm or something real slow. Like I said, it's a great place when you're looking for bass around the bedding periods of time.
Couple things that I can tell you to land the biggest bass of your life: heavier action rods, heavier line size. Whenever you go to a trophy fishery, up your power.
Oh, that's a real good one. I'm gonna come down here. Oh, today on the lake that we're fishing, it's an excellent place to come go fishing because there's so many different types of vegetation and they're all kind of mixed together so that I can really quickly figure out on what the fish are keying in on. Now we're kind of out in a Kissimmee grass field, and one thing I like about Kissimmee grass, it just grows up so much that you get it in so many different stages. I mean, as you can see, what I'm flipping into is the real thick matted version of it. There's just sparse stuff out there, and then there's submergent Kissimmee grass. And the great part about that is the fish have all the different stages that they can pretty much pick and choose what they want. If they want to be in shade, then they're going to be underneath the matted Kissimmee grass. If they're going to be, you know, ambushing bait, they're going to be a little bit more of the sparse stuff. And then they can just live in the Kissimmee grass that just grows right up. Another part about the Kissimmee grass, as you can see, it has lanes and points, and being able to read this grass is trying to kind of how you figure it out. Like if you look at that section right there that we have, you know, you've got 3 points. You've got one right here, you've got one right here to there, and then one right here. And then you have the open area right here in the middle, and that's where the fish can actually sit and come out of those ambush points and eat any bait fish that swims through that area. Like this. I really like it, especially when it gets matted up in its own Kissimmee grass itself, you know, and what it is it just seems to grow so much that it lays over on top of each other, and then the bass use that as a canopy because when it blocks out the sunlight, it actually makes a circle of nothing else underneath there, and the bass will sit in there waiting to feed. If it's matted on the top, then you definitely want to punch it, but you can also fish around those same mats. When it's emergent, when it's sitting below the water, throwing topwaters over it is an excellent way to go. And then when it's actually above the surface, I like to throw worms into it, you know, pitching Cincos into it, baits like that, and you can even wind a spinnerbait through it and burning it through there and catch a lot of big bass that way as well. Right down this Kissimmee grass line, got pads on one side, like I said, submerged hydrilla down here, and just vegetation everywhere. Lily pads, love pitching and flipping into lily pads, and, you know, fishing around the edges. And like I said, creating those little points that come out that you just have to pay attention to, and then pitching into the holes is the way to go with the lily pads. When you have a place that has a lot of different types of vegetation and a lot of vegetation, I like to fish something fast to cover a lot of water, you know. Maybe it's a swim bait like the missile bait shockwave, maybe it's a swimming worm. Whopper plopper is an also excellent bait like that. And then once you get in an area, you know, that they kind of stop biting, then you can slow down. Alligator grass, the only way to do that is flip it. You know, you're flipping big heavy weight, a 1.5 ounce River to Sea trash bomb into it, and a 5/0 heavy gauge flipping hook, and you have to have those as keys to, you know, fishing that stuff effectively. This stuff right here, the alligator grass, it's an amazing place for big bass. And one of the reasons they call it alligator grass is it's tough, but that makes it tough to get fish out of this stuff. It doesn't really get pressured a lot, so when you can actually get into it, you get that bite, you gotta just hold the fish and go in there and kind of get him out and dig in there. But you can see how viney and tough this stuff is to fish. When I'm fishing in vegetation, I really like to use braid. The reason I like braid is it has less stretch to it, and so you get a better hook set, and it actually cuts through the vegetation so you land those really, really big fish. Flat reeds and round reeds, they're pretty much, you know, you're fishing on the edges of them, you're throwing baits that once you get 3 or 4 feet away from that edge, you pretty much want to wind up your bait and start all over again. So I might parallel those flat reeds and also look for those ambush points that come out from them, or I might flip and pitch into the reeds if there's some blown in trash or some other type of vegetation mixed in there with it. Oh, that's a giant. Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a giant. That's a giant. That's a giant. Oh my goodness. Oh, come here, 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 come here. Oh! Look at that thing right there, folks at home. That's a big one. Folks, let me tell you, get in that vegetation and you catch big fish just like this one right here.
Here's a fast fact for you. You know, a drop shot is a bait that you have to have in your arsenal. You know, I like to throw a drop shot on fluorocarbon, and it really twists your line. So Mustad has come up with these new no-twist drop shot hooks. So it makes it very easy to tie up. It's got a swivel right connected to the hook, a little tiny black swivel, and a little loop on the bottom so you can tie your dropper line to it. And it just makes it so that that bait can move freely around. It helps the action as the bait's falling. It helps the action when the bait's hanging there. It makes it stand out straight on the hook. And then you can add whatever size leader you want to it to your weight. So when you're fishing a drop shot, it's something you have to have in your arsenal.
How do you pick the right speed reel for your fishing? Well, I'm going to tell you in the zone. Hey gang, one of the most confusing things on planet Earth is picking the right speed reel for your style fishing. And here's the best way to put it. If you come into Bass Pro Shops, you look at all of these reels right here, you see 6.2 to 1, 7.3 to 1, 8.2 to 1. You say to yourself, oh, that doesn't mean anything. Well, it does. It actually means a lot. And one of the biggest things that I can tell you that will help you out is if you come into Bass Pro Shops, you pick a reel out and ask one of the folks that works at Bass Pro, how many inches of line does that reel pick up per crank? Because all reels can say 6.3 to 1, but only certain reels actually have more inches per rotation. And the other side of that is, and this is critical, is, and I always used to get this wrong when I started fishing, was if you're a slow fisherman, you fish a jig a lot, you fish a worm a lot, use a high speed reel. What it's gonna do, it's gonna pick up a lot of slack when you set the hook. And on the opposite side of the spectrum, If you're a cranker, if you're a deep crankbait fisherman, if you throw a lot of lipless crankbaits, I want you to go to a slower speed reel. And I want you to think of that reel as when you drop a car down into first or second gear, you're gonna gain a ton of power. And what you're really letting it do, you're letting that reel do the work for you. If you go out and sling a deep diving crankbait all day long, well, you're gonna wear yourself out if you have a high speed reel because you're constantly burning and turning. But if you're using a slower speed reel for fast baits, you're letting the reel do the work for you. So here's the best way to look at it. If you're going to Bass Pro Shops and you're gonna buy a worm reel, a jig reel, find the highest speed reel you can find. On the opposite side of the spectrum, if you're buying a crankbait reel, slow down. I guarantee you, at the end of the day, your reel's gonna do the work and you're not gonna be wore out. Hey everyone, we have a great show for you today, and this is Bass Pro Shops at the Pyramid. This is a huge Bass Pro Shops inside the now iconic landmark in Memphis, Tennessee. If you've not seen it, you must see it with your own eyes. It's amazing. Today, Rick Clunn shows us a different way to fish a crankbait, just like a jerkbait during the pre-spawn, as he goes in depth. Then, what does it mean when we hear the pros talk about boat control? I'll dial you in coming up in The Zone. But first, former classic champion Chris Lane shows us his 2 favorite lures for the spawn. Here comes Fishing in 5.
There he is. Today what we're gonna do is throw 2 plastic baits, 2 of my favorite plastic baits during the spawn here on Lake Guntersville. We're on some shallow flats. Of course, we got the lizard and the drop dead crawl. We're gonna try to catch a bunch of fish today and have a lot of fun. Number 1 option this time of year, fishing for fish up in the shallows, whether they're spawning or getting ready to spawn, drop dead crawl. Number 2, my favorite plastic has gotta be a lizard. It's a creature style bait. You can either swim it real slow or you can just bring it across their beds or through the grass real easy. You know, as you can see, we're heading into the back of this pocket. We've got rock. You know, there's an old road bed that comes out of here. There's a lot of stumps around it, and that's where we're catching our fish today. What we're doing is we're making long casts with this lizard and we're slowly bringing it, keeping it in contact with the bottom. But one of the most important things is when you feel that stump, let it sit there for a second, or that rock or that road bed that we're coming over. Let it sit there and wait for that fish to take the bait. Gear today for the lizard is gonna be a 5/0 trocar hook. One thing, it's got it pegged on the weight. This is an XPS weight. You just slide that bobber stopper down and it keeps that weight really, you know, tight onto there. Of course, a 5/0 EWG trocar hook and 15-pound monofilament. Come on, biggin. Just pulled into this cove and they're both right there. We're coming back here, we got riprap, hard bottom, logs, cattails, and we got a bass on bed right here. We are very shallow right now, and one thing with this fish that's up here, it's very skittish, so we gotta be very quiet, put your power poles down, and really try to just let that fish see that bait as many times until he bites it. Here he comes, here he comes. Come on, big boy. You know, the fish is just sitting there protecting the bed. Come on. You work that bait a little bit, the fish is moving, almost gets it, and then he doesn't. I don't know if he'll do it. And then you pitch it back in there and he almost gets it again, being real funny, and then all of a sudden, man, they just take it right away. Springtime, what a great time to get out on the water. It's beautiful outside, everything's warming up. Great time to go fishing. This is the time of year that the lakes start to reproduce. They try to replenish themselves. A lot of fish are coming up. They're full of eggs. Catch a bunch of big fish, turn around and let them go. pulled back in this pocket right here off of the main actual river channel out there. Fish are pushing up to spawn this time of year. Water temperatures 63, 64 degrees. Come back in here, there's some structure back in here, logs, a few docks, but mainly logs, some old tires and rocks and cattails right through here. And fish love to spawn by these cattails and logs. They want to, relate to something. So right here we had a log right in front of a cattail, and the 2-3 pounder was just sitting there, pitched over there with the drop dead crawl, got him. Hey, what I'm using right now when we get back into these pockets where we're seeing these fish on bed and seeing, some heavy cover, some logs, you're down by docks, it's a 7.3 heavy action rod, because a lot of the times when that big fish hits it and you're by docks or trees, you want to be able to horse that fish out of there. You got a 7.3 Johnny Moore's carbon light with a 7:1 gear ratio reel, 50-pound strand braid. There again, we've got a 3/16 weight pegged, of course, and we have a straight shank trocar hook in here. Man, it's a beautiful time of year to catch fish. The fish are starting to push up. Everything's blooming. It's warming up. It's beautiful outside. Get you some soft plastics. Go out there, get in the shallow water, and catch a lot of fish.
Hey gang, during pre-spawn when the water's real cold and shad start dying off, will big bass love an easy meal? And today, Rick Clunn's gonna show us how to fish a crankbait that exact way as he goes in depth.
What we're dealing with here today is pre-spawn conditions. The water temperature is still fairly cold, mid to upper 40s. And it's the time of year when the bites can be kind of slow. My favorite technique probably this time of year is a suspended jerk bait. I'm throwing an RC stick suspended bait. It's really a great big fish technique. It's when you take that suspended bait and you sit there motionless. Now you'll see me when I'm counting, taking up line, but if you'll notice, I'm moving toward it. That's really kind of tough for most of us anglers who have fast boats and fast troll motors when we want to keep moving. But this is the one time of year that really is going to work against you. You've got to be able to get that jerk bait down, suspended jerk bait, and stop it. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006, 1007, 1008. Then, move it again. There we go. See, that was about 1007, and I just moved it when he hit it. And he tried to eat the head of it. As you can tell, the head's in his mouth right there. Hard part is finding that correct, what we call cadence. And, and that was first fish. Maybe he gave us a real quick answer there, but we'll continue to try and see if that's really the whole key. The alternative, though, is really a technique that I'm going to probably fish more today than the jerk bait, and it's going to be crawfish colored crankbaits. What I'm going to try to do is do exactly the same thing with it. The jerk bait is already suspended. Most crankbaits aren't, so I've had to add suspend strips to mine to get it to suspend. But I'm going to throw it out there, reel it down, stop it, and do the same thing. I don't have to have that jerking motion that I have to have with the jerk bait. This one I'm going to have a little bit different technique after I pause it to move it. The suspended jerkbait really originated from an evolution of one lure, and it was actually the minnow bait evolving into the jerkbait, which happened a long, long time ago. My early career, they were not jerkbaits, they were minnow baits. But in the Ozarks, all of a sudden some guys decided, hey, in these cold winter days, I don't want my bait moving so much, I want it to suspend, so they started wrapping the hooks with this lead weight. In doing so, they created the jerkbait. Nowadays, the manufacturers already do that for you. But a lot of the baits I like to fish this time of year, you don't have that luxury, and you have to add the weight yourselves. And we'll be fishing crankbaits that I've makes the spin just like a jerkbait. The action will be a little bit different, but the pulse will be pretty much the same. That's the kind you like, because I didn't have to let it sit very long. Oh, yeah, that's crawfish bait there. He kind of made it easy, to be honest with you, because I hit the rock, I paused it, probably over 2 count at the most, and he hit it. He was probably not, he was fairly shallow, so that's all data you got to take in on this pattern. We had one earlier that was probably 10 or 12 foot on about an 8 count, and this one we had on a, on about a 2 count and shallower. So, which is not untypical this time of year. They can be spread out a little bit, especially on these warm days where they're moving from deep to shallow. As we explained earlier about the evolution of the jerk bait from a floating bait to a suspended bait, nowadays with jerk baits, we're fortunate we don't have to do any of our own customizing of the bait by putting lead on it to get it to suspend. But the other baits, and I think they work sometimes even better, that we don't hear about, and that has not had that evolution, are our medium-sized crankbaits. Because with the jerkbait, again, we're trying to imitate a shad. With this middle freak here, I'm trying to imitate a crawfish. But with these, we do have to customize them. We do have to go with these suspend strips and put them on the belly, and I'm going to kind of show what I normally do. I basically just take a strip, and I try to get it as far forward as possible. On these, I found right behind this eye right here, and it's a strip, it's not a suspend dot. And that way I get more weight on it faster. And what I'm trying to do is achieve the same thing that we have with jerkbait. With these normally 2 or 3 or 4, sometimes it varies, enough to get it to suspend like a jerkbait. And that's all we're trying to do. And so this is a great technique. These little suspend strips are very versatile. But like I said, I'm going to try to put several of them on the bait to get it to whatever you're trying to do. In other words, some guys want it to float up slow. Some guys want it to suspend. Some guys want a little faster speed floating up. Naturally, if you want it to float up fast and you don't put any strips on it, this will pop up real quick. But anyway, I'll just continue to put on these until I get the desired effect. The final step, once I've added the desired weight and to try to stay consistent with having that crawfish color, is I take a red Marks-a-Lot and just paint that red so it kind of blends in with the original color of the stomach of this crawfish crankbait.
Oh, Rick Clunn getting it done with a crankbait. And if there's really one principle to live by, whether it's a stop and go technique with a crankbait or a suspending jerkbait, it's the colder the water is, the longer you want to pause that bait. The warmer the water, the shorter the pause. If you live by that one general principle, you will catch more bass during the pre-spawn.
Even though the jerkbait is probably my favorite pre-spawn technique in cold water, real close to it though, especially if I think the fish are king more on crawfish, it's a medium-sized crankbait that I actually put suspend strips on to suspend. It's a little bit different, the way you get it down, but again, most of the strikes, similar to the jerkbait, will come on the pause. So I'm just going to basically try to get it down to max depth and then stop it. And then I'm going to do the same thing jerkbait. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006. Then instead of jerking it now, like we did the jerkbait, I do what I call short spurts. Just real 3 or 4 or 5 turns of the handle real fast, and then I'll pause it again. Now you'll see me when I'm counting, taking up line, but if you'll notice, I'm moving toward it with the boat. So I'm trying to just take up the line that the boat is moving toward the bait. I'm still trying to keep the bait as motionless as possible. With this bait, I tend to like to also try to move in a little tighter than I would with the suspended bait. Where are crawfish? Crawfish are down in the rocks. So I'm trying to get down in those rocks as quick as I can before I slow it down. Just imagine that it's in the rocks and you've stopped it, and it's down there in the bottom of the rocks. And now you're just letting it sit above the rocks. And then when I move it, I'm moving it back in the rocks and stop it again. So it's just like a crawfish would be. That's a better fish. He was hooked kind of like that last one though, just hooked right in the top of the mouth a little bit. You know, that fish is a good illustration, the one I just lost, that this time of year they do a lot of that, just nipping at the bait. And so you're not going to have them hooked quite as good as you might normally like. So normally you got to play those fish a little less aggressive than I normally would play one. Normally, if I look at the hook and I see he's hooked good, I'm pretty aggressive with the fish. But these fish this time of year, he was hooked just like the second fish this morning, just barely hooked. And you've got to be a lot gentler with those fish if you want a chance of getting them in the boat. You know, and why? Right now, again, I haven't figured out the puzzle, is do I need to slow it down more? Do I need to, you know, maybe speed it up? I've made the mistake of thinking in cold water, I gotta slow down, and it ended up being the opposite. And only a few more fish hopefully will tell me the answer to that. You know, another thing I'll try to do with the finicky behavior that the pre-spawn fish tend to have at just nipping at the bait is I will normally upgrade the size of my hooks one size bigger than what's on the bait. It just gives me a little bit more hook bite with those, what I call slappers. And those slappers will hit it and you got a little bit more of a bite that you can, you know, get a decent penetration. What if the water we're fishing is really off color? In other words, 1 foot or less visibility. That translates into that we're really dealing with a much smaller water column where I think the fish might be active. 1 to 5 foot, 1 to 4 foot. And that's when I'm going to probably go away from the deeper baits like the suspend, you know, jerkbait or the suspend freak, and go to a square bill, but it'll be a flat-sided square bill because they're less buoyant. They won't want to float up fast. And I don't want that movement either up, sideways, or down. I want it suspended. So I'll just add suspend strips on it until I achieve that desired suspension. And that's why I tend to choose this type of bait in the off-color water in pre-spawn. Anytime I'm fishing, you know, treble hook baits and baits that are moving a lot, I'm using the Bass Pro cranking stick. I'm using it in a 7 foot and a 7'6", depending on the particular bait I'm using. Again, I'm using 10 to 12 pound test premium XL line. I use the same reel. It's a Johnny Moore signature reel, 6.3 gear ratio. I choose that even though a lot of people say, well, that's going to be fast. You're talking about fishing slow. I just use the same reel because by doing that, I'm very intimate with how that bait feels with that reel. You change speeds in the reel, you lose that intimacy. So if I got to slow it down, I just have to mentally go slow down, and that's when I pause and move at the speed I want. It's like any sport. You got to concentrate on techniques. Some techniques are more finesse than others. The good thing about this technique, whether it's a jerkbait technique or the suspended crankbait, is all the species that I fish for like it. And the big fish in those species like it, the big largemouth, the big smallmouth, spotted bass, all of them really like this technique, so it's a good all-around technique.
Here's a fast fact for how I pick the best color frog for any situation. In clear water, I want a really dark frog. That solid black one is what I'm gonna go with when the water's clear. In the dirtiest water, I'm gonna fish a frog in. I want something really bright, like that white camo. It's gonna really stand out really well. And that kind of in-between water, I want something that's natural, but not too much contrast. Hot mud camo and brown leopard, both of those have some color to them to where those fish are gonna see them, but still natural enough that in that clear water, they'll still get bit.
Something that I found in really clear, cold water, I like to go to the old school living rubber. They call it the flat brown rubber. Well, this is the bait right here that I won the Bassmaster Classic on, caught 29 pounds the final day. It's an Andy's custom hand-tied bass jig. I just love the color and the subtleness of the flat brown rubber. There's something special about it. I can't really put my finger on it, but everybody that's fished it, they understand why. when you've got those situations like I had in the Classic, clear, cold water, bite might be tough, go with that old brown flat living rubber.
Are you like me? You have an allergic reaction yourself when you catch a big bass? Boat control, #1 thing in fishing. Let's go in the zone. One of the most important things to do when you catch a big one, inevitably what you're trying to do is duplicate what just happened. One of the most important things in the world, if you look at some of the top names in bass fishing, the first thing they do when they catch one, let it go and get right back to business. In fact, here's the best tip I can give you, and I've had to work on this. Here's what you don't need to do. You don't need to take a fish and use it as a guitar. You don't need to high-five the cameraman for 10 minutes. And we drift about 100 yards away from what just happened. Hey, it's real easy. If you have a GPS, you catch one, you lock a waypoint in, you go right back to that spot. Well, what if you're one of those people that doesn't have a GPS? Right when you catch one, just physically lift your head up when you hook one and look at your surroundings. Look at what the depth is. Look at the angle of your cast. Look at the shoreline to duplicate what just happened. The first thing that I teach myself when I hook one, I'm instantly in computer mode trying to get as many variables that are around me with my eyeballs to duplicate what just happened. To catch bigger and more fish when you catch one, what just happened? Welcome to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World in Charlotte, North Carolina. And this store right here, over 150,000 square feet of shopping fun. You gotta come see this. And Bassmaster Classic champion Davey Height is gonna show us his 3 favorite lures for the spawn on In Depth. And have you ever wondered what is the right fishing line to use? Like if you walk through the fishing line aisle, there's a million different fishing lines. That's coming up in the zone. But first, Timmy Horton's gonna take us down to Alabama and show us that defined grass lines are the perfect spot for swimming a jig. Here comes Fishing in 5.
Pretty cool. We get out early in the morning like this, and even though it's the heat of the summer, you can find a good shallow bite if you have shallow cover in your lake. And we're here on Pickwick Lake, and it has a lot of hydrilla that is up shallow. And we're actually fishing a swim jig with a trailer on there, but what this does, it really allows that lure to stay on the surface jumping, coming through that grass. It's weedless. When that grass is really close to the surface, there's not a lure that comes through it better than a swim jig. But for the most part, these fish are on this outside edge, and this hydrilla is only a few feet under the surface. I literally can't see this grass. Every now and then I see some coming up close to the surface, but I can sure see where the break is by both using my mapping and also looking at the graphics where the grass is growing. That solid edge is solid, and it's gonna stay thick like that, but under the surface until it's about 10 or 15 feet out, and then it's gonna break up and almost create a wall. And that's in about 7 or 8 feet of water, where that wall usually is. The bass are going to be sitting out on the edge looking for shad that come by overhead. So they're going to be on that edge, and they see that jig go from not being there all of a sudden to there it is swimming over them. And that's the key, throwing past the window. You don't want to land on top of it. You know, you want them to ambush it out of instinct. This is generally a pattern that's a lot better late in the evening or early in the morning like we have right now. You know, earlier in the spring or late in the fall, it's a technique that'll last all day long. In the summertime, they're going to bury a little bit more up in the thicker stuff as the day goes on. You know, one of the keys that I like to do is to bring that jiggle on the surface and make it boil the water every now and then, or keep that steady V cutting through the top of the water column. When a bass sees that, you know, that kicks its instincts in that the bait fish is injured or fleeing from something, which is going to make them strike. It really keys those strikes. So keep that lure along the surface of the water as well. Well, you can see right here, we'll zoom this in a little bit. But you can see the bottom really gets firm, and a lot of this grass starting to grow on the surface And you can even see on the side, all of this shadowing is grass. So that's really cool. Even though we visually can't see it here, we've got a good spot. And we also know there's a kick out according to the mapping here. So we really got a cool scenario. This is one of those situations where you think the edge is so solid, that's gonna be the edge, but it's not. It comes on out about 10 or 15 feet from visually what you see there. And those fish are all biting out. There we go. Oh yeah. Oh, another nice one. Oh yeah. Sweet. Taking a look at our setup and what makes for a great swim jig. You know, the sizes I like, anywhere from a 5/16 half ounce up to a 9/16 really works well. Staying around that half ounce is really what I like. This here is actually a Gary Klein Swamper swim jig. Some of the other ones that I really like, the Bass Pro Enticer swim jig is a great one. All of them that have the concave head is gonna work really well. The big key, one of the tips that I like to do is trim the weed guard up, because your knotting cover that's gonna hang up. And what I mean by hang up is get hung to where you have to go get it, rock, wood, things like that. Grass, it's gonna come through there very easy, so I like to trim my weed guard down some as well. Now, taking a look at the trailer, what this is actually just a crawl that I have taken in its section, and I cut it off at about the second section there. I don't like a whole lot of it hanging out. I wanna keep it compact, but enough that it's gonna move and swim really good. When you're using a heavy chunk or a crawl like what we're using today, it really allows that jig to stay up close to the surface without moving it too fast. The buoyancy is the key. With those flappers moving, it really keeps that lure up near the surface, undulating the water. That's what's creating those strikes. Now, another trailer that I really like, especially around boat docks with a swim jig, is a Bass Pro Shops Tournament Series Twin Tail Grub. A little bit more action, but when I'm trying to keep the lure up along the surface over grass, I like something a little bit more buoyant, and a heavier chunk or a crawl does that for me. What we were using today, there's a lot of shad feeding, and when I'm using white, I like something that gives a lot of contrast, which this black and blue does. Instead of mixing it all the same, I have found that a contrast of the trailer works really well, and that black and blue is a perfect setup. Oh yeah. Well, he crushed it. Man, that is so cool watching them strike that. Early in the morning, late in the evening, when these fish pull out of this heavy cover, if you've got vegetation in your home lake, give the swim jig a try. You're gonna find this technique will catch you a lot of bass. Look at the contrast of that lure. Well, when they get in the grass too, they get colored up and pretty.
Oh, that magical time of year when the largemouth decide, hey, it is time to spawn, right? But it can also be some of the most finicky fishing we will see the entire season. The beautiful thing today, Davey Height, he is here to show us his 3 favorite lures as we go in depth.
Today we're going to go out and try to catch some fish that are pre-spawn. You know, winter is gone, it's spring, had a lot of warm weather, and the water temperature warmed up really fast on the surface, but a lot of those fish are still staging on these pre-spawn type places. Pre-spawn staging places are typically close to some contour change. Those fish move from their wintering pattern and where they've been all winter feeding out on shad and in that deeper water into the creeks close to the spawning areas. And typically they'll make that move and then they'll just hold until several things happen. The water temperature gets just right, the eggs mature, it's time for those fish to go on and spawn. So it's a little stopping ground, a little place that they hold up, and it's usually groups of fish that hold up together. So it's really fun when you're able to find some, you can catch multiple fish. I picked up a jerkbait to start with. You know, yesterday afternoon was really warm after a cold night the night before last. And the jerkbait didn't feel quite right. I thought maybe these fish might be up there really shallow this morning, even though it's quite frosty this morning. But, you know, I threw this lipless bait right up there shallow on the point and caught one like second cast, and then I just missed a fish. So hopefully there's a little group of them up there and we can get a few of them to bite. There you go. You know, I love fishing this time of year because when you do find fish, they're normally grouped up. And the reason they're grouped up, these fish are staging pre-spawn pattern. I can't emphasize enough, it's so important to know the seasonal pattern. And coming to a lake like this that hadn't been on in quite a while, you don't always guess it right because like I mentioned, we've had some unusual warm weather. Water temperature jumped up 20 degrees in about 10 or 12 days. So it's hard to know, but I just felt like that we still had a lot of fish pre-spawn, and that's what I want to target because there are groups of fish, there are schools of fish, and you just find one place and you can catch a limit that'll win any tournament. There's 3 baits that I certainly like to use when I'm fishing pre-spawn patterns, no matter where it is in the country. The lipless crankbait, the DT6 crankbait, and of course the jerkbait. The reason I like the DT6 in this condition is it's all about vibration and being able to work that bait, whether you're fishing it through rocks, through wood, through grass, that sort of thing, and not getting hung up a lot. You know, it's just a thump. If you've ever thrown a DT6 for the size bait it has a lot of vibration and moves a lot of water, and just those pre-spawn fish can't stand it being around them. Oh, they fight so good this time of year too. Here's a good sign. This is my first cast with a DT6. You see that? I found the bait they want. That fish absolutely inhaled that bait, so this is the bait I'm gonna stick with for quite a while. Jump, baby, jump. Jump, baby, jump. There you go. If those fish are being hooked on the outside of the mouth, you might need to change up your retrieve, your color of your lure or something like that. But when you catch a fish and that fish has that bait all the way in the back of his throat, you're doing things right. Take note of that. Use the same retrieve, obviously the same color bait, and I think you'll continue to catch fish. When I'm throwing a crankbait on these pre-spawn points and drops, I get the crankbait down and make contact with the bottom. Typically it's rock, sometimes gravel or grass, but here on this lake I'm really targeting rock. I think there's three main retrieves that you need to experiment with throughout the day. If you're not getting bites, you need to change your retrieve, and I got a little deal that I say, fast, slow, stop and go. Typically this time of year when water temperature is in the 50s, I'll reel the bait slower. I'll speed it up if I'm not catching any. Sometimes that'll trigger a reaction strike. And then obviously the stop and go technique has always been something that you want to do with a crankbait to try to trigger a strike if fish are following the bait. So fast, slow, stop and go.
One big tip for spawning bass: quiet, silence. Turn your trolling motor down. Don't be a bull in a china shop jumping all over your boat. Think of spawners the same way you do when you're hunting. The quieter, the better. In a nutshell, tone it down.
It's early spring and I've been showing you some really good pre-spawn lures. Typically pre-spawn is when your water temperature goes from like low to mid 40s up into the 50-degree area. I typically want to say those fish really start moving and set up on those pre-spawn places when the water temperature is upper 40s to upper 50s, about a 10-degree range there. I like to crank a lot pre-spawn, but it's tough to catch those fish in clear water with a crankbait with no wind. I tend to like to throw the jerkbaits more when the water's clear on these pre-spawn fish. When it's clear, the sun's high during the middle of the day, or the visibility is just so good that the fish, I think, can see your bait a little too good and tell that it's not real. So a good flashy jerkbait with a lot of action will get you more bites this time of year, I think. There's one. It's a great example of throwing multiple baits on a pre-spawn. I fished 2 different crankbaits there, picked up this shadow wrap shad, and I got a good one. I hope I can land it. Look at there. Nice one, nice one. Jerk baits are used throughout the year, but I think the main time that most anglers throw jerk baits are pre-spawn. When those fish first move to the pre-spawn type areas, they suspend because the water temperature and where they want to be in the water column, they come from that deeper water and they just don't get right up on that shallower stuff. So they go from the wintering place to the pre-spawn type place and they'll suspend. As the process moves along, those fish move up and get a little shallower, but they're still holding on the pre-spawn areas. Then I use the crankbaits and the lipless and that sort of thing a little more. But I'm gonna throw a jerkbait always to try to catch those couple fish that might be suspended off of those pre-spawn staging areas. When I'm fishing a jerkbait, there's a couple things to think about. The water temperature, what's going on with the shad. Those shads start dying off when that water temperature gets in the low 50s, even in the 40s. They're really dying off fast. So you need to be mindful of what those shad might actually be doing down in the water. So a jerkbait, it's a spinning jerkbait, or a jerkbait that has that dying wiggle and that slow rise, I think it's just deadly. And I'm gonna always have one tied on if I've got clear water. There's one. A jerkbait fish. When I want that bait to really be darting around and have a lot of action, if that water temperature is in the upper 50s or above, then I want that bait to be very erratic. So a graphite rod with a fast action will give that bait a lot of action. If it's colder water temperature in the low to mid 40s and I want that bait to be sluggish, so to speak, then I can use a soft, a moderate action, a medium action rod, and that bait won't have nearly as much action. A jerkbait is something that just naturally attracts the fish's attention. You want to get their attention with the flash and the erratic action, but not really see it clearly. And this particular bait that I'm using, when you pause the bait, it stops and wiggles like an injured bait fish, but just basically stays in place. And then it kicks head up and comes up like so. And when a shad's dying, oftentimes instead of just going down, it's like it's trying to get to the surface, and that's what makes this bait unique, and I think it gets you a lot of strikes. You know, with crankbaits, it's real important to find the retrieve that the fish want on any particular day. Fast, slow, stop and go kind of deal is what I always try to do. With a jerkbait, it's all about finding a rhythm and a cadence. I'll jerk, jerk, pause longer, maybe 4 or 5 jerks, maybe 2, but find you a rhythm and a cadence that works. And it seems like once you find that, if you continue to have that certain cadence, you can catch a lot more fish. They are good. He's long and lean. Not bad at all, not bad at all. A lipless crankbait is a really good pre-spawn type bait. It has a tight wobble. When that water temperature is cold, especially when the water temperature is in those upper 40s, when those fish are just moving up, the lipless crankbait, because of the flat side and the tight wiggle in that bait, is deadly during a pre-spawn pattern. Fish, good one. You know, your retrieve is really important no matter what bait you're using. With a lipless crankbait, I like to change my retrieve up like every few casts if I'm not getting a bite. You know, I yo-yo the bait like I'm doing here now. You can reel that bait fast right up under the surface when those fish are schooling, especially like a shad just swimming as hard as he can to get away, reel it really fast. And there's times when it's just a moderate retrieve, a stop and go. And then there's times when I throw that bait out, let it sink all the way to the bottom and just almost fish it like a worm, just crawling it around. You know, a lot of people lose a lot of fish on lipless crankbaits. I've certainly lost my share. But one thing that I've definitely learned is I land a lot more fish when I use a cranking stick that has a slow action and a very moderate bend. This is not a stiff rod, this is a cranking rod, and I land a lot more fish on the lipless crankbait if I use this rod rather than a fast action graphite rod. There he is. That was a yo-yo technique. Most of the time when they bite it like that, you don't have trouble landing a fish because they will really swallow it. Let's see what happens with this one. The yo-yo technique, they love it.
Here's a quick tip. When to fish a chugger, fast when the fish is slow. Normally in the summer and fall, I tend to fish it very fast. Instead of chug, bloop, 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 I'm spitting and I'm working it fast. Skipping it along and stop. Then we're working it another 3 or 4 foot fast and stop, another 3 or 4 foot. But when they get around the bed, they don't seem to want it fast. In fact, if you're around the bed, the longer you can leave that chugger around that bed, the better off you are. So then slow it down. Just boop, boop, and then sit there. Boop, boop. That's the old traditional chugger way.
If you look behind me, okay, and you look at all the different lines that are out on the market right now, you say to yourself, where do I start? Where do I start with that rack that is behind me? And I'm one of those fishermen, and you know who you are, that, man, you use the same line that you used back in 1980, a good monofilament. As time's gone on, you might go to a fluorocarbon and you're like, hey, it works. It works pretty good. I land a lot of fish, but in the last few years, really the last half dozen years, braided line is one of the biggest changes in bass fishing. And here's the beauty of this, okay? The first time that I put it on, and possibly if you're a braided line fan, you say to yourself, well, this just doesn't feel right. Well, it's not that it doesn't feel right, it feels different, but there are so many advantages in braided line fishing that truly can change your fishing. One of them is, if you live on a lake that has a lot of vegetation, a lot of grass, that's when braided line is going to be at its highest power, for the simple reason why, when you hook up into a fish, when a fish bites, the natural tendency is, where does he go? He goes back into the vegetation, and that's a lot of times when we pull out of him, when we lose that fish. Well, braided line guarantees a solid hookup, and it almost acts like a saw. You know what I mean? It acts like a saw and cuts that vegetation. The other side of it is, we all have that friend, you know who I mean, that may not have the most solid hook set. Really, what braided line does for you, it ensures a guaranteed hookup in some way, shape, or form if you may not have properly set the hook right. The reason why, there is zero stretch in braided line. The other side of that is the sensitivity that you're going to get out of braided line is so far and above using a fluorocarbon or a monofilament. Gang, this year, if you want to just up the fish that you put in the boat, not the fish that you hook, the fish you put in the boat, try braided line. Hey everyone, I'm at the very top of Bass Pro Shops at the Pyramid. This is home to one of the largest retail spaces in the whole country, and it's located right here in Memphis, Tennessee. On today's show, Ot Defo takes us to a river system on the Canadian border, not your everyday system, the Niagara River, where Ot shows off some of his favorite topwater areas. That's coming up in depth. Then, how about one secret for when the fishing gets tough on your lake next year? That's coming up in The Zone. But first, we're gonna slide down to Alabama with Randy Howell and do a little mid-depth cranking. Here comes fishing in 5.
Oh, it's a big one. Look, oh my gosh. Oh, I threw the Schoolmaster out off that point. Let it fall down, I counted it down, and a big one suspended out there. Look at that. Oh, he is sick looking, he's so big. Look at that head on that thing. Holy cow. He can't even jump, boy. Look at that. Oh, don't jump, don't jump. Don't jump, come here. Oh yeah. God, look at the monster head on that fish. And now you're thinking, what kind of bait is that? That is a Livingston Lures Schoolmaster. And this is the best kept secret in the Bass Pro Shop store. You walk into that Livingston aisle and you get those crankbaits, and you always see this bait hanging there. People always say, how do you fish that bait? Well, I'm about to show you and tell you right here. Boy, that's the way to start out with a big old bass today on the Livingston Lure Schoolmaster. This is what I was talking about when I landed that fish. This is a bait that kind of hides in the Bass Pro Shops in the midst of all the good crankbaits there that I like to throw. This bait hides in there. It's called a Schoolmaster. Now, a lot of people see it and they ask me at seminars, how do you fish with that bait? And when I'm at the Bass Pro stores doing seminars, you get to see it in the water. It really comes to life. But this bait is it's kind of like a hybrid bait. If you've ever fished a soft plastic jerk bait, which most of you have, it's real similar to that. But it's a bait that when you jerk it and twitch it side to side, it's really erratic. But when you stop it, that's the key. It's very balanced in the belly and it stops, and it doesn't sink forward, it sinks straight down. And it sinks at about a half a foot per second. So every second, it's just barely going down, so it's going real slow. This is a really good bait for the lethargic bass that are suspended in the fall and the winter time. That's when I love to fish the Schoolmaster. Let me show you how you fish this thing though. Make a super long cast first of all, which I like to do. It's a heavy bait because it's got a good ballast belly weight in it that helps that bait shimmy as it goes down. Just throw it out there, let it sink, and immediately I just watch my line. If I cast it out off the side of this 15 feet deep point, I'm gonna let it fall. I never even twitch it, I'm just watching my line. Sometimes your line will stop and then I'll tighten up and kind of pull up on it almost like a jigging spoon sometimes to make sure that wasn't a fish that got it on the fall, or it might have been a fish and you're gonna hook it. If you just pull lightly up on a fish sometimes and the fish has got it, you don't set the hook, you'll miss it. So you kind of got to be ready to pump that rod tip when you first take your slack up. And then I'll just twitch, and I'll start just twitching it much like a soft plastic jerkbait. You're making it go side to side, and then I'll kill it again, and I'll let it fall on a kind of controlled slack line, not a limp line, but a controlled slack line. So I'm watching my line fall about halfway back to the boat, and then I'll reel it back in and do it again. But it's just a real versatile bait for those fish that aren't on the bottom. I'll use my electronics a lot with this bait, so I'm looking at my Lowrance as I'm going around these points, and I'm seeing, like right here, it's 13 or 14 feet deep, and I keep seeing fish streaking through shad. So that's what I'm trying to target, and I'm picturing that bait as it's shimmying down, letting it fall through those shad. And that's kind of why we developed the bait like this, that it could be fished in the midst of all the shad and the bait fish, something that'll stay slow as it's falling and not fall through too fast like a jigging spoon or a swim bait might go down too fast, but this bait is shimmying real slow. And the sound, the electronic bait fish sound, that shad sound, is pulsing and calling those fish to you as it's falling down real slow. All right, it's real simple to switch to sound, and on all the Livingston lures, this particular Schoolmaster right here, you just simply take your thumb on the hook hanger, put it there, and you put your index finger on this, and hold it up to my ear, and I listen to it, and you can hear it. The first sound that comes on is the regular electronic baitfish sound, which comes on in the water. Immediately you'll hear the second sound, which is a crawfish ticking sound. Then the third sound is the intense, high-pitched shad sound, like the fleeing shad sound. And once you get it where you want it, you take your finger off and it locks it in on that sound. After it's wet, then it comes on and starts working. So that's simple as that. It does all the work for you and calls the fish to you after that. There it is. That's how they always bite this Schoolmaster. You just never know when they're going to come in. It's not a big one, but I watched my line jump. Threw it out in front of that suspended dock. Just letting it fall. Little guy, but a tough day like this, a lot of days I'd like to have one like that. But the Schoolmaster will produce for you. You just got to be patient. You got to keep it wet. You got to keep watching your line, and it will pay off for you, I guarantee you.
Hey, we all know Niagara Falls is a great vacation spot, but above those falls, out on that river, well, Hot Defo knows it's great fishing. In the middle of the day, on a topwater bait. That is today's In Depth.
What we've got going on right now is that it's post-spawn. It's early summer up here, up north on the Niagara River. The Niagara River comes out of Lake Erie, flows through here, then it actually goes over the falls and then on into Lake Ontario. But this between Lake Erie and the Niagara Falls is some incredible fishing. There's some islands, there's a lot of habitat in here for both largemouth and smallmouth bass. But those bass that are spawning and immediately post-spawn, they don't want to be right in that direct current where they're going to be later in the summer and then in the fall. They want to be hid from it where they could spawn and have a successful spawn. To do that, they need to find areas that are a little bit more broken up, a little bit out of the current, and that's where I'm finding them today. I'm going to fish all morning with one bait. That's the Storm Topwater 11 and Pearl IU. Oh, got him. Smallmouth, of all things, back in here in this marina. He come up, rolled under it, then he came back and got it. That was pretty cool there now. I saw that fish come out from under that boat, come up there, and he kind of swatted, then he came back, and then he finally grabbed a hold of it. That Storm Topwater, dude, he liked that bait. That was a fun bite. Let's let him go. See you, buddy. We're back in a little marina, and that fish was hiding under one of those boats. Usually fish that are around docks in this kind of clear water are going to be under the best shade. 9 times out of 10, that shade is going to be in the form of a boat. That's where that fish right there came from. This system is very similar to a lot of other river systems in that the fish are going to spawn in areas that aren't in the direct main current. And like I said, it's immediately post-spawn, so those fish are still hanging around those areas. They're not out in that direct current, and that's the way it is on most any river system. Those fish, it doesn't matter if they're smallmouth or largemouth, they can't spawn in that heavy current. They have to get in areas that are a little bit more protected. See you, buddy. Golly, dang, that fish smoked it. Man, what a bite. That's a fish too right there, buddy. That's a good smallmouth. Golly, what a bite. Dang, that's a nice one. That was such an awesome bite. Golly, look at that fish, dude. That is a beauty. That's the kind of fish that you can catch if you just take your time with that topwater bait, post-spawn. He was right beside that boat where he had some good overhead shade. I walked that bait up through there, and he's just, unloaded on it. Golly, what a beautiful fish. Dude, that is a very healthy smallmouth. You can see its mouth's a little bit beat up from where it is post-spawn, but it's already kind of fattened back up, feeding up. He thought he was going to get a meal this morning, but we had a trick for him. Man, what a fish. For me, the rod, reel, and line is extremely important. Number 1 for making the cast, number 2 for working the bait, and number 3 for landing the fish. The rod I use is a 6-foot, 6-inch medium action rod. That's actually the smallest rod I use in all of my fishing. I use for topwater fishing. You need that shorter rod because you're making short, accurate presentations. You don't need a lot of extra rod in the way to make those casts to work that bait back. A 7-1-to-1 reel. This is a Pflueger Supreme XT. You want a pretty quick reel so when those fish bite, you can take up that slack quick. And let's face it, you make more casts that you don't catch a fish that you just need to reel the bait back in to make another presentation. So that fast reel allows you to do that. But I use braided line, trilene braided line, 30-pound test. And I use a couple feet of monofilament leader. I use a 17-pound test trilene XL monofilament leader. I like that monofilament because it keeps the bait up high on the water. And that little bit of stretch and a little bit of clarity, I think helps me draw more strikes. That's the setup I use. Get away from a long rod for this technique. 6-foot to 6.5-foot medium action is what you want to go with. We're out here on the Niagara River, really just a few miles upstream from Niagara Falls. So man, I hope we don't run out of gas today. Otherwise this E21 is going to become a whitewater raft and go over the falls.
Defo getting it done on the Niagara River, and the key word in there, gang, is river. And I learned a long time ago, fishing river systems, and really whether it's in the north, south, east, west, you cannot get shallow enough in the summertime. And one of the amazing things that I found about fishing river systems, if there's enough water to get over their backs, they will live there. And not only that, sometimes they can be enormous.
We're on the Niagara River in New York, and we're catching smallmouth and largemouth. What we've got going on right now is that it's post-spawn. It's early summer up here, up north on the Niagara River. The Niagara River comes out of one of the Great Lakes, and of course that's where the Niagara Falls are. But it's really, really clear water. It has a lot of current if you get out in the main system. But those bass that are spawning and immediately post-spawn, they don't want to be right in that direct current where they're going to be later in the summer and then in the fall. They want to be hid from it where they could spawn and have a successful spawn. To do that, they need to find areas that are a little bit more broken up, a little bit out of the current. That's where I'm finding them today. There's one, he's following it, he's following it. Oh, got him, got him. Dang, I saw that fish and I thought he wasn't gonna bite, just the way he was acting. But he finally did, and that's a dang good one. I was walking that bait, and that's what you gotta do to get those smallmouth to bite. And I'll show you the knot I'm using. It really helps give that storm topwalker that great action. Dude, that's a healthy one right there. Come here, buddy. Yeah. That is a nice smallmouth, and he ate that thing. Check that out right there. Man, what a nice smallmouth. I saw that fish sitting in there, made a good cast. I actually thought he was going to shy away from it, but he turned back around and come up there and blasted it. But the key is walking that bait slow and steady. That side-to-side action is what got him to bite. Let's let him go. That storm topwalker is a very easy bait for anybody to walk the dog with. But one thing I do to make it a little bit easier is I tie a loop knot. It's a really simple knot, but that loop knot makes it walk just that much easier. It's a lot freer. There's no weight up there like it is if you add a split ring. And tying direct, it's gonna walk, but man, I can make it walk so much better and really stay in place good with that loop knot. And that's what's getting those fish to bite today. That bait has a great side-to-side action, and with that loop knot, you don't cover a lot of water every time you twitch the bait. I'm not wanting it to travel a great distance. I'm wanting it to stay in one area, walk back and forth a lot of times, really close together. That's what's getting those fish to bite. Oh, that was me on that one. He didn't get it good either, but he's still behind it. Got him that time. Took me a few tries, but I finally got him to eat it. That was so awesome. You know, most of these strikes that I've been getting on that topwater bait today, they're not what I would call feeding strikes. They're much more of a defensive kind of strike. They don't want that bait in there. You know, some of them, it's late enough in the year that most of them are done spawning. Some of them could still be spawning, but it's a defensive strike. I really don't call it a reaction strike because I don't feel like that's what it is. It's just a defensive strike. That bait is in that fish's lair, it's in his home, and he does not want it there. That's why they come up and take a swap at it. That fish there was a prime example. You know, he swapped at it once. I just kept working it slow and steady, really trying to make it spit a lot of water, but without going anywhere. He come up again, I got him that next time. So that's a prime example. Those fish, they aren't concerned with eating it. Most of the strikes aren't feeding strikes. It's just really a defensive kind of strike is what that topwater bait is, in this clear water, up real shallow around those targets. Oh, come back and get it. Got him, got him. For this topwater pattern to really be most effective, I'm fishing around targets, as I've said time and time again. And those shades, those targets are all producing shade. But to produce shade, you gotta have sunlight. This pattern, you know, people always want to throw a topwater bait only first thing in the morning. But for this pattern to work well, you really want to have sunlight, and it's best in the middle of the day when that sun's at its highest, the shade's the smallest. It really confines where those bass are going to be. See, buddy. So having that bright overhead sun can really dial in that strike zone for you. It keeps you from having to fish big, broad expanses. Everybody knows topwater can be good on points first thing in the morning and last thing in the evening or on a cloudy day. But for fishing around targets that are producing shade, you really want that bright sun. It makes their strike zone a lot smaller and makes you know exactly where that bass is going to be sitting before you ever make a cast. Got him. That fish was really just kind of out in the middle of that pocket, just cruising. But I landed it right in front of him just a little bit and he grabbed it. Man, that's a good one. Dang, that fish is strong. up in that shallow water. He just don't want to give up. He's bigger than I thought he was. Come here, buddy. Open your mouth up. There we go. Dude, look at that beautiful thing. Big old healthy northern largemouth. That fish was just out there cruising, you know. I don't think it was guarding anything. It was just looking for an easy meal. I showed him one, I caught him. See you, buddy. With it being a little bit cloudy as it is right now, you know, those fish will wander out from under that cover, but it's always very important to keep your eyes open. Just look for that. If you see one of those fish out through there, there's no better bait to catch them on than that topwalker. So just make a good cast, make sure it lands softly. I'm catching bass all day long on a topwater bait. Don't ever put your topwater down after an hour in the morning, whether you caught fish or not. Wait till that sun gets up high, creates that shade under those targets. That's where you'll catch a lot of big bass.
You know, we all have a lot of rods laying on the front deck. It's real important when you pick one up to know what pound test you're using. You can just take a piece of tape and put on the bottom of the rod, write the pound test. That way when you pick it up, you're confident of what size line you're using. The Carbon Light rod has a little feature that you can just turn the dial and put it on the pound test line that you have on the reel, so you always know what size line you're throwing.
Oh, don't you hate when they ignore you? I know I do, right? I might have a tip that'll help us both out. Let's go in the zone. You know, one of the biggest lessons we learned when we were little kids is in the middle of summer, when the water temp gets up and all the fish on all of our lakes that we fish and ponds and rivers, well, they have been pressured. They have been pressured April, May, June, July. And you kind of get in the dog days of summer, and that lesson we learned when we were kids was downscale all of your lures, your line, your hooks. Baits like this, baits that are as big as my pinky, and that lesson, well, it's critical. The reason why, you're just gonna get some action when they're not biting. Well, I want you to think about that lesson and ignore it the next time you go out in the dog days of summer. What I want you to do is go to the polar opposite end of the spectrum. Find the biggest bait you own, the biggest bait in your tackle box. I'm not talking something that's 5 inches, 7 inches. I mean magnum baits, 9, 10, 12 inches long. The reason for that is you look at that bait, like I look at that bait, and you're like, I would never throw something that big. Look at the size of these worms, and it's almost like it's embarrassing. You don't want your friends to see you throwing something the size of a tennis shoe, right? But everybody that thinks that way, the fish never see something this big. And if you look at a worm that's 10, 12 inches long, that is nothing for a big bass to inhale something like that. So really, when the water heats up next summer, your lakes have been pounded on. Think about that mentality. Tie on the biggest bait you own and ignore those little lures. Well, something may happen. You might get a couple bites, and not only that, you might get the biggest bite of the year. Hello everyone, today we are deep inside the brand new Wonders of Wildlife National Museum and Aquarium in Springfield, Missouri. This is going to be one of the largest, most immersive fish and wildlife attractions in the world. You know, every lake has that one spot that everyone loves to hit. Timmy Horton is going to show us how to finesse bass out of those community holes as he goes in depth. Then, it might look like all jigs are created the same when we go to Bass Pro Shops shopping. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Stick around for that in the zone. But first, one of the best topwater fishermen on planet Earth, Ish Monroe, he's going to show us his 3 favorite topwater baits. Here comes Fishing in 5.
Today, I'm going to show you 3 of my favorite topwater lures. the double buzz by River to Sea, the whopper plopper by River to Sea, and the bullywall frog. Let's go have at it. So, number one is when I'm first starting out in the morning, I like to get a fast topwater bait, such as the double buzz or the whopper plopper. And that's because I want to cover water and try to maximize my time of catching fish. Then once I've located them, I'll slow down and throw the bullywall frog out there and work it a lot slower, trying to capitalize on a few more bites and possibly that big bite. Got him right there at the boat. Oh yeah, that's a good one. Oh, right there. Look at that one. Oh, double buzz. Rod, reel, line, very important key in landing a lot of those fish. As you saw, that fish blew up on it right on the boat. So, braided line, no stretch, heavy diameter. I throw 50-pound test Maxima braid when I'm throwing the double buzz. Rod, composite rod, medium action, long rod, 7-foot, 7-inch Daiwa Tatula rod, high-speed reel, 6.3-to-1 Daiwa Zillion reel. Played a huge key in landing that fish. He blew up on it, and if you would have had a graphite rod, you would have probably missed that fish because you would have felt him before he had it. Composite rod slows you down, allows you to get the hook in that fish with the braid, put him in the boat. You didn't want it. And fish get like that on top water. It's buzzing over the top of their head. A lot of times they're not in the mood to actually eat it. They're just trying to kill it. And when that happens, I'll switch definitely from the buzz to the plopper because of the big treble hook sitting on the bottom. There's a grass bed out here with holes, and when I'm throwing the regular whopper plopper, I'm trying to key in on those holes because it does have 2 hooks hanging off the bottom, so you cast it towards any grass, it's gonna actually hang up. So I'm kind of just trying to cast it into those holes and working through those lanes. That right there is one of them cases where he's sitting in the lane and he tracked it from somewhere and just didn't get it. Bites like that is why you can't be fake. Braid, 7.3-to-1 Daiwa Zillion reel, and hammer on them with the bullywall. Big hooks in it. Boom! So you want to add these 3 type of baits to your arsenal: a buzz bait, a big prop bait, and a frog. When you're going out there keying in on topwater fish, it's going to help you catch some really big ones. There's a fish right up there.
You know, community holes take a beating throughout the year, and a lot of times the fish live there, but they're very hard to catch. Tim Horton's gonna reveal a couple naughty finesse tricks. It's today's In Depth.
I tell you, we're out here and it's late summer. These fish have been out on their summertime places for a while, but when these fish have been on these community holes all summer long. The places get fished over and over. They really get a lot of pressure. I like fishing crankbaits, spoons, swim baits, fast moving lures. But late summer, schools of fish, you really got to slow down. And we're going to talk about what you need to do to fish along the bottom. We can literally idle over these places and see lots of fish there. Catching them is a different story. We're going to show you some tricks today. It's going to help you be a better late summer fisherman on these schools of fish. It's a good fish. So what makes a community hole the reason we term it a community hole? That means it gets fished a lot. It gets a lot of pressure. Places that get fished a lot, there's a reason. There's a lot of bass there year round. And a lot of places that are offshore structure places, it's because of the bottom composition, or it's because of how current hits it, or a combination of both. Regardless of what it is, the bait fish is always there and the bass are always there, therefore the anglers are always there. But you can go to these schools that get a lot of pressure and still catch them throughout the summer by using the right drop shot setup. Now, these places we're fishing, the school of fish is usually sitting in an area about the size of the boat. And what it is, it's where the current comes in and hits the corner of a river ledge. And that's why those bass sit right there, waiting on the shad to get washed through, or whatever it is that comes through. It's like it comes up and hits, and they sit on top. And where it comes up, they're gonna get right on the face of it, right where it hits it and comes up. There we go. Dog days of summer, you gotta slow down and really scale down your line and everything. And that's what the drop shot does. You know, the drop shot was more of really a West Coast in the mountain lakes of California, and also the Northeast is really where it prevailed because the water was so clear. But here on the Tennessee River on these ledges, it's really becoming a popular deal in the late summer like this. Hey, we got out of the brutal heat getting here in the shade. We're going to show you guys a little bit about a drop shot setup. It's real simple. Basically, the biggest difference is your weight is going to be on the bottom and the lure is going to be up. When I'm fishing these ledges, I like it a little bit longer than normal. This is about 24 to 30 inches, somewhere in that neighborhood. But what we've got is a 1/2 ounce tungsten, and I like tungsten because it's very sensitive. Bass Pro Shops weight. It's got a little hang tag that hangs on it. I usually tie it on a little knot there. It makes it a lot better. And we come up to the working end here. What we've got is just another Bass Pro Shops XPS hook, a little number 2 drop shot hook with a Clunn 6-inch straight tail worm. This is actually called a little bear worm. And I like anything that's a straight tail. You can use a Zoom trick worm, a Bass Pro shimmy shake worm. Any of those type worms that are really small, straight tail is going to work really good. Now today we went with the Junebug color, and I just like it. It's a great color. It doesn't matter if you're in Florida, here on the Tennessee River, or in the Ozarks. Junebug is just a great color. Taking a look at the rod and reel setup, this is a 7-foot rod. I like a little bit of a longer rod when I'm making these long casts on these ledges. Ducket Micro Magic rod with a 6:2-to-1 Team Loose Pro spinning reel. This is a 200 series with a 6:2-to-1 gear ratio, works really well. Now on our line, this is 10-pound shooter fluorocarbon tied to 20-pound test braided line. I like about 10 foot of a leader to be on the fluorocarbon, but that braided line on those long casts is really going to make for a situation where you can get a good hook set. One thing about these deep ledge fish, I mean, they stay here. They'll get out here in June and they'll stay. There we go. That's a good one there. That's a better one. It's a good fish. I mean, it's a giant.
You know, a lot of people tell you in finesse fishing that, well, the lure is the most important thing, right? Not all the time. One of the most important factors in finesse fishing, line size. Dropping from 10 down to 8, 8 down to 6-pound line. A lot of times it'll save the day. And here's the thing, when you drop down in line size, well, you're gonna get more bites.
I feel that head shake. You know, when you get a bass on and you feel that head shake and a fish is backing up, this is a heavy fish right here, guys. The thing about a spinning rod, you just got to take your time. This is a big one. Oh, look at this fish. Ooh. But these fish will get out on these ledges in the summertime and they'll stay. I mean, it's not a morning deal, it's not an evening deal. They live out here all summer long in these big schools. That is a nice one right there. Leaving close to the boat, you want to take your time. I like when you see that hook on the outside of the mouth too. Man, that is a tub right there. I mean, he was hooked good too. Look how thick. 5-pounder, drop shot. Man, ain't nothing like catching a big one on light tackle. But that's what you got to do. You know, fish like that will smoke a crankbait all day long when these fish first get out. But later in the year, you got to use a technique that you can slow down and be real subtle. 6-inch Junebug worm on a drop shot. And what a drop shot is, it's actually where you have your weight below the worm, and it's just subtly up off the bottom. And when it comes by them, they can't hardly turn it down. It's just a great technique. You know, the one thing about this lure, it's really just keeping contact on the bottom, trying to slowly move that weight, and the worm, which is up above it, is going to move around with the current. That's really what's moving it. What current is actually flowing along the bottom of the river channel there. We got a little window that's about 20 yards here that these fish are on. You want to try to be bringing your lure downstream with the current if you can. So we're getting at a little bit of an angle where we can do that. I don't want to get up on the ledge completely and parallel it and do that, because there could be fish up on this part too, so I don't want to spook them. So what I'm doing, I'm sitting out here in 40 out in the deeper water and throwing up at an angle so that my lure slides down with the current. There's another one right there. I mean, right when it come over, that's another good fish right there. Coming up. That's a largemouth. Oh, I love it. I love finding these mega schools like this. And slowing down with this approach. He felt big, but he's not. The spinning tackle makes him feel really big. Cool. And basically all you're doing on the hook set is just reeling into the fish. It's not a reel down and pop your rod. With this spinning tackle, it's just go to reeling real fast and lay back at the same time, all in one motion, like this right here. That's all you're doing, and that drives that hook home every time. That's the cool thing about that light wire and those hooks, is it really, you know, just the least amount of pressure that you use. I mean, just all it takes is a fast reel with your reel. I mean, you're actually setting the hook with the high-speed luge reel, driving it home. You know, once you hook a fish on a drop shot, you're going to land them most of the time. There's just something about that hook that they can't throw. And it doesn't create a big hole. And there's not a lot of weight and resistance there that they're slinging around. The weight is way behind them. So once you get them hooked up, you're going to land them most of the time unless your line breaks. That's why you got to really take it slow once you get close to the boat. One thing that's important, constantly check that drag. You know, I like to keep it a little bit firm while I'm fishing, and once I get a fish on, I'm going to reach down and just loosen it up a little bit. So braid is really what's happening with spinning reels right now. You know, I can leave this on here, I'm not going to get any line twist. Look when I open that bail, when that line gets done coming off, gets done falling, the breeze is actually keeping it on going, but there's no bail out, there's no you know, kinking of the line, and braid allows you to do that. It really takes a lot of the frustration out of fishing a spinning reel. But the thing about it, you want the transparency on the end. That's why we've got about 10 foot of fluorocarbon leader on there. And it really makes for a great setup. You know, one thing about a place, on how long you fish it, I think that's the biggest decision we all make, whether we're out fun fishing or fishing a big tournament. But with me, the logic is if I've caught a big one, like we did that one, I'm going to stay a little longer, especially when I graph that many. Because when you see a school this big and they're still not firing really hard, you know, we've caught several here, but we've made a lot of casts where we didn't as well. And that goes to show the technique that is so important. You almost have to slowly put it in front of one. You know, we're here in early August, but in June when they first get out, they're a lot more aggressive. This time of year, not so much so. You've almost just got to sit and work a spot a little bit longer than normal to try to get those bites. Oh man, this is so cool. You can take a look on this graph even back here and see when you come up on the table, that's where these fish are sitting at. Oh yeah, boy, you can see these fish right here. This is textbook. When they're sitting up on the table, they're feeding. That's when they're catchable. This goes to show there's a lot of them here, just like a big school getting out in the first of the year. What I tell people all the time, think about a car, a sports car commercial, where they're in a wind tunnel and the wind comes up over the hood and doesn't touch it. That's what current does. You know, when it comes up over that ridge, the current flow goes above the table where those bass are sitting, and that's where they're going to sit and feed and waiting on the shad to come up. A lot of people think that bass are going to get on the downside where it falls off. That's not true. They're going to get right on the face of it, right where it hits it and comes up. That's where they're going to sit and feed, and this is textbook. That is a lot of bass we're seeing on the screen right there. There we go. Oh, that's a good one. Man, he's a stick. Man, I love it. Oh, yes. Look at that. That's what I'm talking about. Another stud right there. Good one. Gorgeous. Hey, I'm gonna tell you, highly pressured areas, scale down. It's about the light line, the small lure, and even more importantly, fishing really slow. Go to those places, get a lot of pressure, use the right technique, you're gonna find you can still catch those fish. There we go.
Here's a fast fact for you. You know, when you're fishing soft plastic, one of the things I've found is these belly weighted hooks. This is a little mustad grip pin hook here. It's got a little keeper on it, so it keeps your bait from sliding down. You know, if I want the bait to run a little bit deeper, you know, I'll use a belly weighted hook. It changes the whole dynamics of this bait. It makes it wiggle when it falls, and it makes it fall directly horizontal. So this is a really great option. I've caught lots of fish by using these belly weighted hooks. It's something you have to have in your arsenal.
So a jig is a jig is a jig, right? They're all created the same. No, no, no. Let's go in the zone. You know, a lot of people would say one of the best baits in the history of planet Earth for bass fishing, well, it's a jig. And there's a reason why the aisle at Bass Pro Shops for jig fishing is this big. A lot of people think, you know what, when I go bass fishing, just give me a jig, they're all the same. How untrue that absolutely is. There's two things to look at on a jig, okay? Number one, I don't pay attention to a lot of the colors, because they're either white, brown, green, or black. There's a reason for that. Either bait fish, or you want it to look like a crawdad. But the two most important things, look at the line tie and look at the hook size to match your style fishing. Number one, if you fish a lot of vegetation, okay, a lot of grass, gnarly grass, use a straight eye jig. The reason for that is if you throw a swim jig or a shallow water grass jig, you want that straight line tie to slick through the vegetation. On the polar opposite side, you'll see a flat eye jig, a flat line tie. The reason for that is you want that flat eye to roll over cover, maybe rock and wood and stuff like that. If you throw a flat eye jig in grass, it's gonna get hung up. If you throw a straight eye jig in hard cover, it's gonna get hung up more, okay? And the second thing, and this is very critical, match the hook size to your style fishing. If you fish a lot at 8 and 10 pound line, use a finesse jig with a lighter hook. If you're one of them gnarly bass fishermen in shallow water grass, use one with a big beefy hook. And really the middle ground is what I call a deep water jig, like a football jig. It kind of has a little stouter hook on it, a little bit bigger hook on it, but you can penetrate a fish on a long cast. So do me a favor, the next time you grab a jig, remember, they're not all created equal, and match it to your style fishing. Hey everyone, this is the granddaddy of all outdoor stores, the Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World in Springfield, Missouri. What a great vacation destination. You have to see this for yourself. And today we have all-time great Kevin Van Dam doing what he does best, finding fish fast in the fall as he goes in depth. Then, are you not catching numbers of fish on a crankbait the way you want? Well, you might be suffering from low speed presentation syndrome. That's going to be today's In the Zone. But first, Defoe's going to show us what he uses when post-spawn fish decide, well, it's time to eat. Here comes fishing in 5.
go. I thought I was on the end of that limb right there, but it was a fish had a hold of it. Fishing a plastic worm is something that's been around for a long, long time. Man, a lot of people have just quit doing it. But I'm gonna show you today why it's so important to keep this bait in your arsenal, especially in the early summertime. A plastic worm, such as the Berkley power worm, this is a 7-inch model, and I fish the 10-inch model a lot too. In the early summer, once those fish are post-spawn, they're starting to move out and they want a meal. They want something that's got some action to it, like that power worm does. So feeding them something like that, and the way that I rig it up, is really important. I like to fish it on a jig head most of the time. I'll fish it on a Texas rig, especially when I'm fishing that submerged grass, a lot of vegetation. I'm gonna fish on a Texas rig. The head I'm gonna be fishing that on is the VMC rugby jig head. I like a 1/4, 3/8, half-ounce size jig head, just depending on the amount of current, the bait that I'm fishing, and those different things. There we go. That's a good fish. Oh yeah, that's a nice one. Right out there on that point. Oh yeah, that's a real good one. Look at here. That fish there liked that worm. Oh yeah. It's a good old school worm eater right there. 7-inch Berkley power worm, pumpkin seed of all colors. Not even a fancy color. The old power worm, pumpkin seed color. Catches a nice one. Man, that was cool. You know, in the summertime, I really like fishing a worm. And I don't mean a straight tail worm, I mean a curly tail, old school Berkley power worm, whether it's a 7-inch like this is, or a 10-inch. And dude, I can't tell you how many bass I've caught on a pumpkin seed one. You know, there's a lot of other colors out there, but pumpkin seed and plum are pretty much the two colors I use in the summertime. For summertime bass, it really pays a lot of times to go old school, throw a worm. My technique for fishing the 7-inch and the 10-inch power worm is very similar. I'm going to throw it out there, let it go to the bottom on a totally slack line. If it's deep, you want to push your button and actually peel line off. You want that bait to get on the bottom as quick as possible. The way I fish it most of the time is to let it rest on the bottom, lift the rod tip up a little bit to where you could imagine you're picking that worm up 8 inches to a foot off the bottom, and then give it slack again and let that worm fall all the way back to the bottom. And always be watching your line. Number one, it's going to tell you indication of when that bait's on the bottom. But number two, if a fish bites it on the fall, if you don't feel it, you'll actually see your line jump. So always want to make sure that you're paying attention to that line as your bait's falling. But throw it out, let it go to the bottom, and then lift it up just a little bit and let it fall back. The only way that I'm going to vary from this is if I know those fish are suspended, then I'm actually going to snap it up off the bottom, kind of give it a double snap and let it fall back. And again, always pay attention to that line as your bait's falling. There we go. Got one on the 10-inch worm. Man, he thumped that thing whenever he grabbed it. Man, that 10-inch worm, he thumped that out on that point. That fish was probably 12 or 15 feet deep. If I'd been throwing that smaller worm, little chance that fish would have found it. With that big worm, he's able to find it pretty easily. That 10-inch power worm, that's a pumpkin seed, half-ounce head. When I'm fishing that 10-inch worm, you really need a little bit more weight to get it down there on the bottom and keep it on the bottom, especially if you're fishing over 10 feet deep. In real shallow water, I'll go down to a 1/4 ounce. But if I'm fishing over 10 feet deep, it's going to be at least a half, sometimes even 3/4 ounce on that VMC rugby head. There we go. Got me hung up for a minute. Come here, buddy. The fish was right in that brush pile. You know, for fishing a worm, I like the same setup basically for both of my 10-inch and my 7-inch worm. See you, buddy. I like a 7-foot to 7'3" medium heavy action. The only difference that I do on the 10-inch worm when I'm making those long casts, I like to fish it on braid with a leader, trilene braid and a trilene fluorocarbon leader. For the 7-inch worm on that lighter head around shallow cover, I fish it with straight fluorocarbon. I'm usually making a shorter cast, shallower water. I like straight 15-pound test Berkley trilene fluorocarbon for that 7-inch worm setup. Same rod and reel for both, 7/9-to-1 Fluger reel, 7 to 7'3" Fenwick rod, medium heavy action. That's all you need for that worm fishing.
In the fall of the year, fish scatter everywhere. Shallow, mid-range, deep, you name it. In fact, it's almost hard to know where to even start. Well, here today, KVD is here to dial us in as he goes in depth.
You know, anytime you've got a fish, you know, in that early fall, late summer transition period, it's just typically almost always a really tough scenario. You know, in the fall like this, when, you know, it's just starting to transition from summer, it's a tough time of the year. You know, I've got, you know, 10, 12 rods out on the deck with all different types of baits, and I was just going down this flat bank and I've been throwing, you know, red-eye shad, crankbaits, spinner baits, just trying to get a sign of what's going on, looking for some activity. You know, it's all about finding the bait and anything that you can kind of narrow down where the fish are at. They just scatter out over these flats this time of the year, so you can see we've got a good early start, and early in the morning is usually, you know, a great time. You can get out here and get a few active fish early, and then it's going to be a grind after that. So we're going to kind of go through the fall transition today and see what we can put together. You know, in the fall, it's all about the shad. I mean, I didn't know if I was going to have to fish deeper or shallower to start with. So I had a lot of rods rigged with a lot of different type baits that you can trigger fish with. And, you know, caught a few small fish. This little guy. To start though, nothing chasing, nothing moving, nothing going on. And, you know, I knew then that it was going to be a challenge. I'm just a keeper, but I know I'm going to have to work for it today. You know, one of the things that I really focus on this time of the year is flats. You know, you got to find the bait. A lot of times the shad are going to move into the backs of these creeks and pockets and things, but the bass just like to push shad up in there, to run those shad up in those shallow areas. So if I go into a shallow pocket like this, I'm looking for those little transitions, but I really want to focus on those flatter sides. And definitely there's always an early bite. You know, there's going to be a little flurry activity right at sunrise, until that sun gets up. And then a lot of times, especially as the nights start to cool, you're going to have a window where the shad come up to the top and start getting active, and the bass will chase them. I really couldn't get anything going super shallow. I knew I needed to look at that next zone, and that's why you have all those rods rigged, you know, different crankbaits for different depth zones. And I started fishing in that mid-range zone, caught a good fish, immediately had another bite, caught another good fish like that, and that tipped me off that, hey, these fish are not all the way in the backs of the creeks. They're not all the way shallow. So just being aware and seeing all of those signs told me that I needed to fish out just a little bit further. I mean, this fish probably just is starting to move in from deeper water. And I can feel that there's a little bit of, you know, rock or clay or something out there, and it's not very deep. You know, I'm totally focused about the backs of these creeks in the fall. That's where the bass are gonna end up. But you just gotta figure out where they're at in that transition, you know, from the main lake. So if you can find some cover, you know, isolated cover on them, whether it's underwater or not, it can be really good. So I will do a lot of, you know, graphing with my side imaging, looking for stumps and things like that. I mean, one or two isolated stumps on a flat point like this can be gold, but those shad will come to the top and the bass will follow them too. They know, you know, that when the shad get active, then it's a lot more conducive for them to chase them around. These bass are just staged here on this point, probably waiting for pods of shad to come in. And as they do, they'll move towards the backs of these pockets and start chasing them. Oh yeah, right here, perfect. There's right here a bunch of bait. And there's just this right off the side of this little flat point. It's 5 foot of water. So, I mean, this is what you're looking for right here. You can see there's some brush there. You can see there's fish. There's some bait around it too. You're trying to find activity. I'm not seeing it on the top, but I am seeing it right here down below. So, I mean, that's a great brush pile right there. You know, I said earlier that crankbaits are kind of key for me. So, you know, I'm gonna have crankbaits to kind of cover all the depth zones. You know, everything from a Series 5, which this will get to about 10 feet deep or so, And you know, a 1.5, a 1.0, both of those, you know, that's that 2 to 6 foot zone. A little Series 3, that'll get me to that 6 to 8 foot zone. A lot of times for me, it's the small bodied baits, you know, this time of the year. I mean, the shad, the chase in the fall are typically small. So I'm gonna have a mix of those baits to try to cover all the depth zones. And then hopefully I can find one of those zones where the bass are really at. It's very visual fishing. You know, I'm looking all directions. I'm trying to find, you know, see some shad flipping, or, you know, look for herons on some shallow points, anything that'll tip me off to some activity in the area that you're in. So I'm just basically fan casting around as I'm moving back into this creek, and bam, I catch one on a square bill.
Hey, one thing I want you to do next fall when you hit the lake, just don't start fishing. Use your eyeballs and become a bird watcher. One of the times a year where fish really congregate on bait, well, it's in the fall. And the one thing that can tell you where that bait is at is when you start to see birds diving. Trust me, next fall, when you find the birds, you find the bait, and in return, well, you're gonna find the bass.
That early fall transition can be a tough time, but if you have all your stuff ready to go, you can be successful. I'm just wandering around. It's just a flat bay here, and you know, I was throwing a Series 5, caught a couple on the point on the outside of it coming in, and just caught this one on a 1.5. So, and again, as I'm looking back here, I hadn't seen anything this morning, you know, shad-wise. Now we got shad moving. With these shads starting to flip, you know, anytime I'm getting in an area where I know there's bait and there's bass, that hydro wave can be a real trigger. So I've been running a finesse pattern. I'm gonna change it to a delayed schooling pattern. And one of the big things people ask me when I'm using that hydro wave is, how do you know when to run that sound pattern? I want to just try to increase the activity level. If you know, I want it to be the trigger, that sound of, you know, another bass eating shad, and that competitive instinct in them will trigger them to school. So I've got it on a 30-second delay, you know, delayed schooling action. It's shad sounds mixed with an occasional bass attacking a shad. The shad are there, the bass are there, they're just waiting for a reason to chase, and the hydro wave a lot of times will be that reason. So it's been really successful for me, especially under these types of circumstances. One thing I like to do is just kind of sit here, you know, put those power poles down. Don't touch the trolling motor, let that hydro wave work, and let you get those shad active, you know, where there's no trolling motor starting and stopping, nothing at all. Just be real quiet, fan cast around, I mean, and watch, and you'll see that bait get real active. Bait's here. So are the bass. Now all I'm doing is just following this. There's a little point right here going back, and it splits these two little creeks, and I'm seeing a lot of shad. Got the hydro wave going with school, and I haven't seen anything chase yet, but he's there. There's a lot of bait here. You know, a small square bill is one of my favorite baits this time of year because it's just so efficient. You know, I mean, you're fishing shallower water, and this thing is very erratic in action. You know, I've got a summer sexy shad color right here, and that's the real key, is if you've got stained water in the backs of some of these creeks, the bass are gonna be shallower. If it's clear, I know I'm gonna have to fish out a little further, and I'll use different baits. You know, I'll use a swim bait, a jerk bait, a topwater. But as the water gets stained, you know, my favorite bait is a KVD 1.5, a KVD 1.0, and a Strike King red eye shad. Typical fall pattern bass. I mean, you can see he's kind of skinny. They're getting, you know, focused on those shad, and as the water cools down, they're going to fatten up and get ready for winter. You know, there's a difference in the types of reservoirs you're fishing in the fall. You know, lowland reservoirs, you know, places like Bugs Island or Lake Murray, you know, that are flat, you know, in the east. These fish relate to real subtle depressions and ditches and things like that. You know, you go to a place like Dale Hollow or Table Rock, these highland reservoirs, you know, there's lots of rock, there's lots of channel, little swing banks, there's lots of regularities, and there's a lot of shallow cover for the fish to get on. But the same thing really applies. You know, you got to find the bait, and you got to find those areas where those bass got some shallower cover. And that's really what it's all about, you know. And you're going to cycle through a lot of fish in these places. You know, you're going to get into a lot of small fish. We haven't caught a big fish yet today, but that's what you have to do, you know. I mean, this is a numbers game, and eventually you're gonna run into them. You know, that's why I keep covering water and keep moving. It's all about finding, you know, the bait and the bass, because they're constantly on the move this time of year. You know, so this little fork in the creek where I ended up finding the bait and the bass, it's just, you know, a subtle ditch or a trench in the middle, really, that had a nice taper to it, but it did have some cover on it. It had a few stumps, had a little bit of brush along it, and it was really just a subtle flat out to about 4 feet, and then it had a little bit sharper drop to it down to about 6 foot, and then it tapered up onto the flat on the other side. And those bass were kind of on the top of that ledge and along the edges right there, and it's just, that was the deepest water leading into that big flat bay. But what you're really hoping for is that instance where you find that one little area and you can catch some quality fish, and that's what finally happened today. There's a good one. There he is. That's the one. It's a bass. Early fall fishing can be really tough, but if you go out there with a positive attitude, have a lot of different options ready to go on the deck, you can be successful. The biggest thing is you gotta cover enough water to find the bait. If you find the bait, you're gonna find the bass. Look at that, big old bass. Giant. That's the one we've been waiting for right there. Look at there. All those small, oh, and he's barely hooked. All those small ones. Oh, I got him good. Look at there. There's like a 7-pounder. How about that? That 1.5, I mean, slick calm, I have fished the fire out of this area and just keep throwing time and time again. I mean, that fish is solid. Probably just moved up in here, and that's what you're looking for. You know, you're trying to make it happen, you know, covering as many of these points and things like that as you can, trying to find where the fish are at. They're in these ditches like you know, we found today. Ended up starting with a Series 5 and followed them back with a red eye shad and a KVD 1.5. That's fall fishing at its best.
Oh, that's a big one. Oh. There he is.
Yeah. Here's a fast fact for you. When I pull up to an area, I like to find multiple targets. I've got a shade dock right there, I've got a rock wall right there, and wood pilings right here. And that gives me an opportunity to fish all different types of structure to figure out which type the fish are on. It's gonna help you catch more fish.
So you throw the same exact crankbait as KVD, same color, same size, and you just don't catch him as good as him? It's time to go in the zone. You know, growing up, I heard the term that throwing a crankbait, well, it's an idiot bait, right? We've all heard that term. It's been around for like 40 years. You tie a crankbait on, you throw it out, and you make it rain bass. It's as easy as that. No, we all know, no, it's not. Here's one of the things that I've learned over the years. Sure, you need to find the right crankbait for your depth. You gotta find the right depth crankbait. Not only that, you gotta find the right color, right? That's pretty critical. The number one thing I've learned from learning from the best, speed. Let's look at a couple guys that are, well, they're really the best crankbait fishermen on planet Earth. Edwin Evers. If you watch him fish a crankbait, it's exhausting. It is truly exhausting to watch Edwin Evers fish a crankbait. Not only that, how about Rick Clunn? I have covered Rick Clunn in tournaments for over a decade, and I'm like, how do you sustain that? All day long fishing a crankbait at the speed of light. The reason why, reaction bite. Throughout years, I think we've all thought, you know what, a largemouth bass, he's just an old sloppy Joe. Sits down there on a rock pile in a lay down, eats chicken wings, doesn't get around a lot. A largemouth bass is a lot faster than we all think, than we all give him credit for. We don't want him to see that crankbait real well. We just want him to react. And trust me, he's a lot faster than we all think. The next time you go out, you're throwing a crankbait and you're kind of crawling it around down there, I want you to think of Edwin Evers. I want you to think of Rick Clunn. and the speed in which they power wind on a crankbait. Well, there's a reason why. It's not to get exhausted, it's to knock their lights out. Hello everyone, and welcome to the brand new Wonders of Wildlife National Museum and Aquarium in Springfield, Missouri. And trust me, you have to see this place with your own eyes. Today, Ishman Rowe targets pre-spawn bass right before they go to spawn as he goes in depth. Then, one of the most asked questions in bass fishing, what is the strongest and easiest knot to tie? We're going to visit that today in the zone. But first, Edwin Evers shows us a few of his favorite topwater lures, why and when. Here comes fishing in 5.
It's really fun for me frog fishing in clear, grassless water. You know, so many people think you gotta have grass and mats to frog fish. I love fishing a frog in open water really quick as a search tool. You know, you may not, sometimes I've had tournaments where they don't actually get the frog, but they'll show me where they're at. I'm gonna fish it really fast like you would a spinnerbait. Really short jerks in a short strike zone, make another cast, and I'm gonna go really, really fast. And I use this bait as a search bait. And it can be right in the middle of the day. Sunshine, you don't have to have clouds, nor grass. It's a lot of fun. That was the most awesome frog bite I've ever had in my life. Holy smokes! That fish literally jumped kaboosh. I mean, and it was so close to the boat. Look at that, you can't even see my frog. Holy smokes, that was so much fun. Look at that, it's gone. That's one thing about frog fishing. I'm using an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel. I like to fish it super, super fast. I'm not giving them an opportunity to say, hey, do I want to bite that or do I not want to bite it? I am fishing it really, really fast. Just pause, pause. And it's just going to be a reaction strike. I can cover a lot of water with it. And man, it's fun. I love it. It's one of my favorite things to do in fishing. Oh, I got him. One of my other favorite topwaters is a bait like that. That is a wake bait. I love this bait when I need to call fish up from really, really clear water, when I need to call them up from the deep, when it's calm. It's got a propeller on the end, it's got a really obnoxious rattle. You can hear how loud that thing is. It's just really loud, and you can catch great big fish on it. Gosh almighty, that's a cool strike. What I love about this topwater, this Megabass Diamante, is that I can sit there and I can almost walk that thing in place. It's got 3 hooks, so you really hook fish really, really good with it. And I've got a silent version and I've got a loud rattling version to choose from. So when I'm trying to call fish from the really deep water, I want a really loud one like that. It'll just sit there and aggravate them. You know, I've got now where the wind's really, really picked up and you know, there's not a lot of topwater lures that are gonna work in the wind. One of them is a big, popping style bait. I've got a Pop Max on right here, and it's a bait that I can just make a big loud sound, throw a lot of water, yet keep it in one spot so those fish can find it in these windy conditions. That's a better one. Oh yeah, look at him jumping. Oh yeah. Man, that's fun topwater fishing. It just doesn't get any better. Oh, he engulfed it. He engulfed it. Awesome. My third favorite topwater, I really like that one. That's a Pop Max. I use that in certain situations when I got a little bit more chop on the water, when I am not catching them on the others, when they're just wanting it a little bit slower, I use that Pop Max just like that bait right there. That is fun, fun, fun. Holy!
That looks like a big one. Oh, it is a big one. Good night. Any chance I'm gonna get it through all that? Holy smokes, he come up from behind it and ate it. Oh wow, fish got an attitude. And then you get him up here and he's not near as big as I thought he was. Still a big one, but man, that braid is such a key in all three of my top waters. I've got braid on all three of them. And the reason is, when you throw way out there like that, you don't have any line stretch when I set the hook. You know, I'm making a long cast in this clear water. And that braid makes your baits that much easier to work. If I had to narrow it down to my three favorite hard topwaters, it'd be the Diamante, which is a walking cigar style bait, a wake bait, you know, like the eye-jack or the eye-loud, or a popping bait like the Pop Max, you know, the Balsa Pop Max, the Baby Pop Max. There's certain situations, they're all three completely different lures, and there's gonna be certain situations when one's definitely better than the other or another's better than the others.
Pre-spawn bass can be hard to get dialed into, and Ishman Rowe's going to reveal how he knows just before they're getting ready to lock onto beds. That's today's In Depth.
There it is. Let's come off this edge of the grass here. That's where a lot of your pre-spawn fish are going to be sitting. Nice pre-spawn fish. What we have here is a edge of grass that starts out where the channel breaks off into, and then you've got your big spawning flat out there. In the pre-spawn, these fish are basically setting themselves up to start here, and then they're gonna spawn back there. And so we're gonna sit here on the pre-spawn spot and work up this edge of this grass where they're staging, they're feeding up a little bit, and then they're gonna move out into that flat and do their spawning. Right now, we're in the pre-spawn mode. You know, pre-spawn starts at different times of year in different parts of the country. You know, we're in Alabama right now, so it's middle of March. Pre-spawn's going on. Water temperature pre-spawn usually starts somewhere in the ranges of 54 degrees up to about 61, 62 before they really start making that push to the bank to start spawning. There he is. Oh, good fish, good fish. Oh man, just good fish. Oh God, nice, pretty healthy fish right there. I mean, nice fat belly on her. I mean, you see the tail, she's getting ready to get up there and start her spawning. These fish, what they do is they're gonna get set up and staged up on the places right before the spawning flats. That'll be the ditches leading to the spawning flats, the creek channels, the main channel that have big flats that are right on top of them. It's all the stuff leading to where they're gonna go spawn. So those are the type of places that we're gonna fish today. There he is, bigot, bigot. Oh yeah, bigot. Oh, bigot, right off the point. Oh. Man, he freaking just didn't even bite it good. Just kind of walked up there, swam up there and ate it. And he didn't even hit it that hard. But still, nice, fat, chunky fish. I mean, this is what pre-spawn fish look like, you know, just healthy, good-looking fish. What you're looking for is anything that has a flat, it has a hard bottom where the fish have spawned in previous years. So now you're looking for places that lead to those. You're looking for the points, you're looking for the ditches. And so it can happen anywhere on the lake that has a spawning flat accessible to the fish. Here's another thing that I pay a lot of attention to. On my Lowrance Gen 312 is the temperature. And I've watched a 3-degree temperature drop the further I go back in this creek. Even though it looks really, really good, with that temperature drop, that tells me that the fish probably have not moved in because they do like the warmer water in the pre-spawn. It gets them a little bit more active. So me moving my way out of here is definitely gonna be something that I'm gonna do because of paying attention to those little things. The bait that I'm using is a chatterbait. It's kind of a cross between spinnerbait and a crankbait. It has a blade on the front that gives it a lot of wobbling action, but it's not a crankbait and it's really not a spinnerbait, but people refer to it as a bladed jig. And then I've got it teamed up here with a Missile Baits Twin Turbo. Gives it a lot of action. As you can see, this one's been chewed up here a little bit by these fish. It's just one of them baits that you can fish through grass and rock. It has a great presentation for imitating, you know, crawdads or bluegill, and especially in the pre-spawn, the fish want a lot of protein, and those bluegill and those crawdads provide that for them. Chose green pumpkin because it's a real natural color. I like real natural colors at this time of the year. Sometimes I switch up to a shad pattern or a white or even a black and blue, you know, for when the fish get really, really heavy on the bluegill pattern. But the twin turbo gives it a lot of action. Double kicking legs, just looks realistic like a fish. Been chatterbaiting all morning. I think I'm gonna make a switch, fish a jig underneath some of these docks with this shade. Then fish will hang out there. On the old jig, you know, a lot of things happen here in the pre-spawn is these fish start staging out here on the edge of these docks, and they're getting ready to move up, move to the back of the points, or the back of the pockets. So they'll sit here on the last couple of pilings out here on these docks, and as they start going, they'll start working their way back to those pockets, and that's where they're gonna spawn at. And so you can get out here and throw a shaky head, throw a jig around. Sometimes you can catch them on a jerk bait or an Alabama rig out here on the edge of these docks. These fish get really, really active and feeding up before they move to the back of the God, fat, healthy fish. Look at that belly on him. They're sitting there in the mud. You can see the mud that's sitting there on him. He's just sitting there laying in the mud, getting ready. I mean, as soon as he gets a couple more degrees, that fish is going to definitely be ready to go.
You know, we've all heard that a crankbait is a reaction bait. You have to hit something to get a bite. Well, this year, I want you to think of a swim jig or a bladed jig the exact same way. Make sure that bait hits something. A piece of wood, a patch of lily pads, submerged grass. The next time you go out, think of your bladed jigs and your swim jigs as a reaction bait.
I'm here today in the middle of Alabama, in the middle of March, on some pre-spawn bass. I want to go out and show you a few techniques that I use to go out and catch these fish. You can apply these techniques all over the country when you're fishing in the pre-spawn. Oh, fat. Man, that one's fat. When you're fishing down through areas, you know, paying attention to your graph is huge. Seeing where the channel swings in, whether the Lowrance Insight Genesis tells you that or your depth finder shows it to you, is paying attention and working those areas where there's just a little bit of depth. There's having those highways, and the channel is the highway to the spawning flat. And somewhere on that highway, they make pit stops to eat. And so if you're there and they're at that pit stop, boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom, boom. That one was sitting right there on the outside edge of the dock. Basically, the jig is a very compact jig. It's called Ike's Mini Flip, made by Missile Baits, and I teamed it up with a new bait by Missile Baits called the Crawfather, and it has a lot of kicking legs. I'm fishing it in a 1/2 ounce size, which I really like, but it's a small, you know, you're thinking 1/2 ounce, it's a heavy weight, but it's a small compact jig with a little bit heavier gauge hook in it than a finesse jig would normally have in it. Then the Crawfather itself is basically a crawdad with good kicking legs, and I like to have some action in my jig when I'm fishing it in the pre-spawn. Isolated dock. Pull it into a spot, isolated dock. You got, you know, 50 yards that way, 50 yards that way. It's the only dock around. You definitely got to make a cast to it, especially on, once again, the points like we've talked about, moving into the spawning pockets. And during this time of year, you want to change, you know, the way that you're working the bait. You see me doing hops with it at times. Sometimes you see me dragging it. If I find a brush pile on one of these points or underneath one of these docks, I'll let it sit there and soak in there, and hopefully to get that big female into biting. So that skip underneath there, that's what a compact jig allows you to do, is skip way back up underneath those docks. And those places where those fish sometimes sit, especially when that sun pops out. A lot of times in the pre-spawn, these fish will sit way back up underneath these docks in that shade. And so having a compact jig allows you to skip it way back up underneath there, along with the right rod and the right reel and the right line size. That's a big one. That's a good one. Oh. Got that one right off the point. That one right there was dragging it. Like I've said before, when you're fishing in the pre-spawn, you got to change up your way you're fishing sometimes. Sometimes you got to drag the jig, sometimes you got to hop the jig, and that one right there was dragging it on the point, and that one ate it. I rigged it on a 7-foot 1-inch Daiwa Steez AGS rod. That's a heavy action rod for getting those long hook sets and horsing those better average fish from underneath that dock. And then I teamed it up with an 8-to-1 Daiwa Steez reel, which for me, you're not really moving the bait with that reel. You're actually just taking up slack in the line, and you want the fastest reel you can for that and being able to pull those fish out of that heavy cover. So the 8-to-1 reel helped with that, and this is pretty much my setup for the jig and the pre-spawn. I can hold on to it. Oh man. Oh, yeah, the jumper. Oh, nice fish. Holy smokes, look how fat that thing is. If you apply these pre-spawn techniques, you're definitely gonna catch more fish, especially when you've had that cabin fever, so give it a try.
When I'm choosing blades for cold, muddy water, spinnerbait blades, this is what I'm going to choose. I'm going to keep it kind of simple. I'm going to have Indiana blades, as you can see, or Colorado blades. I really like copper blades in that muddy water on sunny days. I like the white Colorado blades on cloudy days. And the water's a little less stained, maybe a little warmer. I like that red kicker up front with a gold Indiana. Chartreuse, chartreuse and white, coleslaw, those would be the spinnerbait trailer colors. But these blades to me are the important. I have the painted ones on cloudy days, the copper ones on sunny days.
To catch one of these true river monsters, you're not going to need a good knot, you're going to need a great knot, and that's today's In the Zone. Hey gang, I learned this knot about 10 years ago, and I'm not going to lie, it is the easiest and strongest knot I have ever used in my life. In fact, I've actually passed it on to my teenage boys and said, this is the one you need to use the rest of your life. And the key to this knot, just practice it about 10 times and you will knock it down. It's real simple. We are gonna go through the eye of the lure or the eye of the hook, and we're gonna make a giant loop. The bigger the loop, the easier this knot is gonna be. So we're gonna have a loop, Then we're gonna have our line going to our rod and a big tag end. You're gonna hold those in one hand, okay? I'm actually gonna make that a little bit longer. And you're gonna spin the lure or hook 5 to 7 times while holding all of your lines together. After you spin your lure, take the loop right there and drop it through the bottom lines. And here's the key. Don't cinch this loop. Just let the loop hang there, okay? Let the loop hang there. Hold your lure or your hook. Take the 2 top lines, your tag end and your line to your rod, and jam it down as hard as you can onto that lure. Now, what we're gonna have right there is we're actually gonna have 3 tags when we're done with this. We're gonna have the loop tags, you're gonna cut those, and you're gonna cut this top tag. And the beautiful thing is, it'll actually act as a bait keeper. When you snip those, it will hold your lure in place. Trust me, if you learn this knot, a lot of people call it a shark knot is what I've heard here and there. If you learn this knot, good luck breaking it your next time out. Trust me, strongest one I've ever used. Hello everyone and welcome to the Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World in Springfield, Missouri. We have a great show in store for you today, so let's jump right in. Just because bass are gorging on shad in the fall, and I mean big time, well, it doesn't mean they're easy to catch unless you're, well, KVD, and he's gonna show us exactly how to catch them as he goes in depth. Then, are you getting the most out of your electronics? In fact, are you using them to find fish fast? That's today's In the Zone. But first, don't overlook the power of small. Hot Depot is gonna show us how to catch giant smallmouth on a tiny marabou jig. Here comes fishing in 5.
Ounce marabou hair jig. Man, it's such a simple bait. It's something a lot of people don't even think of using for bass. But I've caught some really big fish on this just in the last few years. It's a technique I want to show you today and really help you understand the ins and outs of it and how it can help you catch more and bigger smallmouth, especially in really shallow water. Oh yeah. I seen that bed over there and I thought, man, that looks like a smallmouth on it. And he came right up and grabbed that little black fly. When those fish are up shallow, smallmouth, spots, when they're up there in shallow water spawning, post-spawn, pre-spawn, a 16th ounce marabou hair jig is so tough to beat. It doesn't look like much, but dude, it really gets those big fish to bite when they won't bite much else. Yes, look at that. That little bitty hair jig and that big old smallmouth bass. That fish right there was in this little small eddy. When those fish are spawning or post-spawn, they're going to be in places that are out of the current, you know, that are a little bit more protected. They don't want to be right out in the middle of that main flow. It doesn't have to be a big eddy, it doesn't have to be something huge. It just has to be protected, it has to be still water. That's where they're going to set up at. This area appears to be kind of a man-made reef of sorts. You can see all these little rock islands that are, you know, they're not natural. You can just tell by the way they're built and stuff. It really makes for some great cover. It breaks the current. They're allowing a little bit of current through here, which is good for those smallmouth. They don't want to be spawning right out in the middle of the main current, but they do like a little bit of current, and it's really just got some great cover, some great features, and some great fish living right around in here. That was a fish on a bed I saw on my way in. Remembered exactly where he was. Made a long cast over there with that hair jig and caught him. You can do that a lot of times. You see those fish, spook them off the bed, mark them, remember exactly where they're at, go back, make a long cast, catch them. Another beautiful fish. It was on that bed. I saw it on the way in, could see it from a long ways off, made a long cast, caught him. The retrieve with that hair jig is really very simple. I throw it out, I let it hit the water, I clip my reeling gear, and I steady wind it. The only time I'll ever move the rod tip at all is when I feel like I touch something, you know, whether it's grass or the bottom, or if I feel like I got a bite. But it's just about a slow, steady retrieve. You don't want to add any action to it. That marabou, even though it doesn't look like it's doing much, if you watch it close in the water, you can actually see it kind of breathing and moving a little bit. And I take just a little bit of a worm, usually just a piece of Berkley bottom hopper worm, just about an inch of it. I just want to slide it up on the hook, and that really makes that hair flare out in the water, gives it a much bigger profile. And that 16th ounce head isn't much. That little piece of plastic worm on there actually helps you cast that bait a lot further. So it does a couple things. It helps you cast further, makes that bait look a little bulkier in the water, and really makes that marabou swim really, really well. I want to show you the setup that I'm fishing that hair jig on. The reel, it's a Fluger Supreme XT size 30. It's a little bit smaller diameter spool, and that makes it take up less line every time you turn the handle. If you use a real big diameter spool spinning reel, it just makes it hard to slow down to fish that hair jig as slow as what you need to be winding it. I like 10-pound Berkley nanofill line with an 8-pound trilene fluorocarbon leader. That nanofill is really important. It's so small diameter and it's so soft and so supple that you can really throw that small jig a very long ways. The rod is also very important. I like a 7 to 7.5 foot medium light action rod. That light action rod, just when those fish bite, you don't have to have a really hard hook set having no stretch in that nanofill. So you just load that rod up, it puts a big bend in it, and it keeps that bait pegged in those fish's mouths. So medium light action rod, small diameter spinning reel, 10-pound Berkley nanofill, put your fluorocarbon leader on there from Trilene, you'll be good to go to catch some really big smallmouth. It's not a really hard bite. They just swim up to it and put it in their mouth. You know, it doesn't have a lot of action, doesn't have a boot tail, so they're not really gonna slam it. Don't expect that. Just expect the rod to load up. So the next time you're out fishing for smallmouth, you can see them up in that shallow water, but you can't get them to bite something, make sure you've got some black marabou hair jigs. A 16th ounce is what I use the vast majority of the time. If it's really windy or a little bit deeper, I may go up to an 1/8. But that 16th, a little bitty piece of worm, 10-pound Berkley nanofill, an 8-pound fluorocarbon Berkley trilene leader, dude, you're gonna be set up, you're gonna be ready to go to catch some really big smallmouth.
Giant schools of shad and bass feeding for the fall. What better time than to grab a buddy and try 2 different presentations at the same time? KVD and Davey Height are going to show us how it's done in today's In Depth.
Fish. Good one. It's a bass, I got the right species. When you're chasing these schoolers like this, you just, it's a lot of fun. I mean, we're catching some hybrids and stripers and things like that. It's a nice little spotted bass, but you know, here on Clark's Hill, it's everything. It's largemouth, spots, stripers, hybrids, white bass, but they run around together. And you can see them, they're busting off that spot right there. You know, Davey and I have been rooming together for about 10 years or so on the Bassmaster Elite Series, and you know, we've fished Clark's Hill multiple times in May. I was here actually when Davey won here, and you know, it's a legendary lake for schooling fish. And I had to be in the region anyway, so he said, man, we ought to do a show down there.
Now in the fall of the year, especially, these fish suspend, they roam around, the hybrids, the stripers, the spots, the largemouth, everything is out roaming around, chasing these herring and these shads.
Oh, he jumped off. They're all over here. It's a fun way to fish because it's visual, and we can kind of give them that 2-pronged approach too, you know?
Well, we're not fishing against one another. It's just fun to 2-pronged approach and get to catch stripers, hybrids, spots, largemouth, the whole 9 yards. Have fun. The key is figure out what the largemouth and the spots want. That's what we've got to try to figure out. But there's always a little something you can figure out. It's always a certain bait, a certain retrieve, a certain speed. And
you can try 2 things at once this way, you know? I mean, I love a jerk bait for schooling fish, you know? I mean, it's just because you can, you know, not only get the ones that are up on top, but those ones that are down a little bit. But with no wind like this, it seems like you got to have something moving pretty fast. Here, these fish, because of the water clarity, they're suspending over 20, 30 foot of water, and they're out in the main lake, and they're pushing these pods of shad up, you know, in the early mornings and the late evenings. And if you're there at the right time, it can be awesome. The bass especially are mostly over some of these long clay points that come out where it's got 15, 20 foot of water, or maybe even a little shallower there. And the stripers in that are typically up there outside of that even. Yeah, here we go, gosh.
Yep, they're relating to those bars. You know, it might be 30, 40 feet deep, but they're relating to them. These shad, they'll actually spend the summer out on the main lake, and the herring too, especially the herring. They really need to spend the summers out in that 70 to 100 feet of water. And they start moving in these creeks as the fall progresses.
Right now what we're seeing is a lot of like small shad, and they're really selective in what they want to bite. So I've got a deep diving jerkbait on. He's got a soft plastic jerkbait and he's hooked up. They're just every direction right here. I mean, it's all around the boat. You know, the big thing we saw right away is that these fish were really selective. With no wind, even though it was getting lower, evening light, they're really skittish. And right away we could kind of tell that, jerking a jerkbait real fast was one way to trigger some of these fish into biting. And we caught, a handful of bass and a lot of stripers and hybrids. Another one of them hybrids.
Found what the hybrids are reacting to. God dog.
Everything's out here. Spotty, there you go. Right now it's dead calm, and that helps us see where they're at. But if the wind was blowing, they would be a lot less selective. I think we could catch them a lot better. But you got to know where they're at too, so.
And those bigger fish have just seen more baits, get a lot of pressure. People are out here every day after these fish, and there's bigger fish here that's just hard to trick them.
I mean, there is not one direction right now where there's not something coming up.
See, another cool thing about the two-prong approach, I can sit down and have me a little sports drink, a little hydration, and I got a pretty good prong still fishing there. That's really cool.
There's nothing better to me than being around a bunch of fish like this that are hard to trick into biting than figuring out what it's going to take. Because they're eating a little bitty bait, but the problem is if you throw a little tiny jerkbait or crankbait, you just can't cast it far enough to get to any of them. So you got to have something heavy, something you can move fast, and something that looks natural. We were out for a couple hours, got into a lot of action, saw a lot of schooling fish, found an area that definitely had a lot of bait in it. And we said, you know what, let's shut it down, come out here in the morning when hopefully the stripers are out in the deep water and it's just the bass up on top of these humps.
Yeah, we just need to find some bigger fish. We had lots of fun. Need a few less stripers, a few less hybrid, and a few bigger spots and largemouth.
Yeah, we'll get after it again in the morning.
We've all heard the term matching the hatch in fly fishing, right? Well, what's that have to do with bass fishing? A lot in the fall. When bass are feeding on bait fish, whether it's threadfin shad, gizzard shad, perch, bluegill, they are so in tune with what they're eating. Pay attention to that size and exact color to what they're eating. Trust me, if you match the hatch in the fall, you're gonna catch a lot more bass.
Got it. We got to start about 9 o'clock or so, and immediately caught a couple of fish right away. And we started to get a little wind, and we're thinking, man, this is going to be a really good day. There we go. They're still around. Today we're going to try to figure out what we got to do to catch them, when they're not busting. And hopefully they will start again, because it's fun when it's like that. But this is a lake that they set up on a lot of offshore deep, humps and points and things like that. Not really typical for fall schooling fish. And if you're there at the right time, it can be awesome.
So we started out in the morning with basically the same two baits that got things going best the evening before. The soft plastic jerkbait and the hard jerkbait. Good spot.
Largemouth.
Oh, yeah, baby.
Old chunk.
Okay, I want to show everybody I'm fishing today with Kevin Van Dam. We were out here yesterday for just a couple hours, and we got it going on this morning, babe.
They're around here, and the stripers are not going to be in our way like they were yesterday in the hybrids, so good start.
Kevin's throwing a hard plastic jerkbait. It's got a lot of action, and he's the king of jerkbaits, that's for sure. And I throw those type jerkbaits too, but I like soft plastic jerkbait a lot, and we're trying to throw different baits to see what those fish want.
Here where we're fishing over, some of these deeper, points and things like that, a lot of times, you're gonna hold your boat in 30, 40 foot of water and you're fishing over 20. So if you got a bait that can get down a little bit deeper and has really good action, it's gonna help. And that's why this is a really good bait right here. I mean, this is the Strike King KVD deep diving jerk bait, and you can work it real hard. I'm working it, snapping it real fast. The key is getting that bait closer to where the fish are at.
I'm throwing a soft plastic jerk bait, and I really like to throw it out over these deeper points. And the bait's moving around so fast so I just reel the reel really fast for about 5 or 6 turns of the handle, and stop it and give it a twitch or two, and then reel it again and stop a couple of twitches. So the fast movement really makes those fish want to chase, and then when you stop it with a weighted hook, it just has that falling, dying action, and it's just really, really good. I throw it on 12 or 14 pound tests. Bass Pro XPS fluorocarbon. I use 7-foot medium action Johnny Morris carbon light rod. When I kill that bait, that's when you usually get the bite. So right before I start back, I'm just kind of trying to sense that line's tight instead of slack. And when it's tight, then I just pull, kind of swing set into the fish.
We had to work hard, but slowly but surely, we kept catching fish. I haven't been here since I've seen this Lake Master mapping on here, and it's unbelievable. I mean, how detailed it is. And you can kind of see now, like where they were schooling, it's typically not just some straight long point. There's a little corner on the side, and I mean, that detail it's just incredible.
It's amazing that once you see the whole lake mapped out like it is, places that you just caught fish on, you see why. Because sometimes it's because the bottom's flat where they want to be. Sometimes it's because of a sharp break or rock. All those things that are just so important to be able to find fish offshore.
That's what I love in the fall, is to be able to fish things that you don't physically see. Nice. He's not a real big one, but he just been eating. That one there was just, there's a long underwater point, and it's like 20 foot on top, and I threw it out there. Oh, Davey's got one on a drop shot. I know that I've got an activity zone here where there's a lot of bait, and there's definitely some bass there. So now it's just a matter of figuring out the little intricacies of that exact area and trying to catch as many as I can, showing them some different baits. But there's bait in the area when, and there's bass. I'm catching a little bit of everything.
I'm a good friend when it's your show, and I shake off all those nice 2 or 3 pounders that bite, and I only catch these little runts.
They set up on offshore deep humps and points and things like that, and they're pushing these pods of shad up over 20, 30 foot of water, and they're out in the main lake, swim bait going, we had jerk bait going. We knew we'd have to have a drop shot ready. The key is figuring out what stage they're in and what sections they're in, and then you can run that pattern all over the lake.
Kevin and I had a 2-prong approach going into this show, and it really was good to have.
Good one.
Some days it doesn't take as many fish or as big a fish to have a good day. That was kind of the case, and we ended up getting it done.
I mean, look at that.
God, good one.
Oh,
that's the kind you want.
Yeah, old fatty.
Good deal.
God, there was another one just as big with him too. I mean, slick calm, and there's some little ones busting around here, just jerking that jerk bait, and he got it. And there was another one every bit as big, if not bigger, with him too. I mean, and look at the belly, man. They're just, you just gotta keep working at it, but keep yourself where they're at. Good one.
Golly. Oh, it's a big one. Oh, look at that fish. Open up, look at that one.
It's a good fish anywhere you're at in the country, right there. One thing I always think about is the current coming through any given body of water. And I want to present my bait with it and against it. I'm going to always try to think about that, how I think those fish are positioned. They're always going to be facing up current, and I want to bring my bait naturally right to them. But there's times I might want to bring it across them or against them. Always think about your angles, think about the way the current is coming through the given body of water, and try to present your bait different angles every time and every spot you go to.
Are you getting the most out of your electronics? In fact, are your electronics helping you catch more fish every time out? That's today's In the Zone. You know, when you come into Bass Pro Shops and you come up to the electronics counter, well, it's a little bit intimidating, okay? You're looking for a new unit for your boat and you want a unit that can do anything. In fact, if you look at these units, you have got down imaging, side imaging, 360 imaging, really depth finders now, they could find ET. But one of the most critical things about a depth finder these days, it's simple. It's the mapping chips that you can get to put in these units. If you look at all the mapping chips that are out on the market right now, it's amazing the detail that you can get for your home lake. In fact, you can find out a lot of things about your home lake that you never even knew. You know, a couple weeks ago, and this is no joke, we were on Falcon Lake, and I've fished Falcon Lake now for about 15 years. I slipped my mapping chip in, and it was a whole new lake to me. In fact, we were able to find rock structures just by looking at the mapping, real tight contours that I never knew were there. It was like opening up a new book. So this next year, when you get out on the lake, check out one of these mapping chips, okay? And here's the beautiful thing about this. They are so detailed now, you'll hear a lot of anglers say they're almost too detailed. They're showing anglers things that we never could find looking at those old just paper maps. Really, if you look at it from a safety purpose, from a safety standpoint, these are so deadly accurate. When you put a mapping chip in, you can run on a lake and not be scared anymore. That is a big thing about mapping chips. So check this out. One of the things in bass fishing, finding those little baby contours, well, mapping chips for depth finders will show exactly where they're at. Hello everyone and welcome to Bass Pro Shops Outdoor World in East Peoria, Illinois. What a store. If you have not seen it, you have to come check it out. Hey, today former classic champion Chris Lane is going to show us a great way to use shallow swim baits during the spawn as he goes in depth. Then choosing the right soft plastics for your fishing when there's so many colors to choose from. That's today's In the Zone. But first, 7-time Angler of the Year, Kevin Van Dam is here to show us his top secrets for slow rolling a spinnerbait in 5 minutes or less. Here comes Fishing in 5.
There's one good too. I love slow rolling a spinnerbait on timber, man. It just really, and there's a lot of baits you can fish on timber, but when you stand in timber, deep brush, there's just, you know, there's not many baits that you can control the depth of like you can a spinnerbait like this. So good fish right there. Slow rolling a spinnerbait is just a great way to be able to fish through that brush. You know, it's pretty darn weedless. You know, it imitates a shad, a bluegill, a lot of different forage species. And again, what I love is just the feel and the control that I can get. What I try to do is just kind of keep that bait kind of moving through there and hit that limb, and then let it flutter, let it sink on the other side, but not with a slack line. So just a nice medium type retrieve, and let that spinnerbait do the work for you. So a lot of people think different things when they think of slow rolling a spinnerbait. Really all it means to me is that I've got a spinnerbait blade and head combination that allows me a much slower retrieve. So I can really let it stay in the strike zone and work and thump. When I'm gonna slow roll a spinnerbait, I always try to do it where I know that the bait is over the top of some type of cover. So, you know, right here, I'm just basically fishing along this, out from this point here, and there's some isolated timber along here. And you know, the lake's a little bit low, and I'm just trying to feel my way with that spinnerbait down through it. You know, you never know
if the fish are going to be down near the bottom or suspended up in the tops of the trees, and that's why a spinnerbait is so good, because you can really control the depth of that lure. The bass still relate to the structural depth changes, and the timber is just the cover on it, you know. So there's a lot of times the sun is a good thing, you know. It's going to put those fish and position them right in the branches of those trees. That's why it's important to make sure it, you know, it bangs off those limbs and you let it flutter down, you know, for a split second. That's what triggers them to bite when they're real neutral like this. This depth zone, you know, when I'm fishing, you know, 6 to 12 foot of water, is this, you know, Strike King KVD Scorcher spinnerbait. You know, this is a bait that we sell just to Bass Pro, and it's designed as a fast retrieve spinnerbait. And what I mean by that is one that you can reel pretty fast and it's going to stay down. What that does when I'm fishing it slow and deep is it keeps it in that deeper strike zone. So this is a 3/4 ounce bait. It's got a little heavier wire to it. Comes, you know, equipped with a trailer hook, which is critical to me. But the main thing is it has these 2 smaller willow razor blades on there. They're a little narrower than a regular willow blade. They have less lift, a little less vibration. So this bait right here runs deeper than a standard 3/4 ounce spinnerbait. And it's my favorite for fishing timber like this. So, you know, I'm throwing a 7.4, you know, my own signature Quantum Tour KVD spinnerbait rod, and it's a medium heavy action. A 6:6 to 1 reel, a little slower gear ratio. I don't want a high speed. And I'm throwing 20-pound Bass Pro XPS fluorocarbon. You know, you want a graphite rod. It's got a real fast tip to it, so you can feel that bait as it's coming through those limbs and feel those blades turning out there when you're slow rolling it down through the cover. A lot of times like this, when the water's dirty, I'll cast out there and let the bait sink to the bottom, you know. But anytime you're gonna let your bait sink, make sure that you have tension on it. Don't let it just helicopter down, you know, with dead slack line. You know, especially in this timber, you want it, you know, you want those blades turning, you want to feel it going to the bottom. I'll let it get down to the zone and then just start my retrieve. Oh God, there's a good one. Look at that. Oh. Finally. You know, that's right there is why you slow roll a big spinnerbait in that timber. It holds big fish. And he got it. I mean, really. That's what you're looking for. Sometimes that's all it does, is it takes just a little bit of change in the conditions. You know, we've got no wind, we've had bright sun all day long. Slow rolling spinnerbait is just a great way to be able to fish through that brush. You can catch a few fish with these spinnerbaits.
You know, there's times during the spawn where a largemouth becomes very aggressive. In fact, at times he can leave himself open to over-harvest. Well, I can go on and on about that, but I'm going to leave it up to my good buddy Chris Lane as he goes in depth.
This is typical springtime on Lake Guntersville. We have beautiful trees, they're just now changing, beautiful azaleas that have been blossoming, dogwoods. And what's going on right now is the fish are coming in, they're getting ready to spawn. This is the time of year that the bass really push up into these pockets. And what we're doing is we're covering a lot of water, a lot of depths of water, from real shallow all the way to 4 or 5 feet, trying to catch the bigger pre-spawning bass. We're catching fish on the bed, we're catching fish off the bed, going up to spawn, coming off to spawn. There's just a lot of things going on right now. This time of year, Lake Guntersville, big bass, fat bass, and just a lot of area to cover and a lot of area to fish. You know, one of the neat things about throwing a shallow water swim bait this time of year is you can throw it over scattered grass, scattered wood, on the edge of these mats, cattails, you know, all over the place. And right here, we have grass, you know, it's only about 4 foot deep right here, and you have grass that's probably about this far off the bottom. And one thing about it is that swim bait's just coming through there, you know, just slow rolling it down. You got sticks and a hard bottom. You know, one thing this time of year you want is to make sure you have a hard bottom. Quite a few fish in here, and they're just getting ready to set up, spawn, feed, just kind of enjoy their time up in the shallow waters before summer hits. There he is, little guy. Nice little bass right there. There you go. Fishing in this area right here, as you can tell, we've got a very slow retrieve. And the reason is I'm sitting here looking, it's about 4 foot deep, right off of some points that are coming out, some channel swings that come in, and there's some grass down there about 1 foot above the bottom. I want to make sure that that fish sees that bait the entire time or keeps it right in his strike zone. If I'm up too high, the fish is going to watch it go by at 62-degree water temp. But if I'm down right in front of him or right over that bed or right by that piece of grass and it gives that fish long enough to follow it, boom, he's going to eat it. There's another one. Right there. I mean, this fish probably hit it 2 or 3 times. We're not even up to where we lost that big one earlier. This was just one that, you know, I think I had a bite or 2 coming around this point, and I mean, that time it got it. Look at how pretty these fish are, just a beauty. This time of year with the water being cooled down, you want that slow retrieve. So a 6.2, 6.4 gear ratio. You don't want a 7.1 right now. I think it's just a little bit too fast. And of course a 7.3, 7.2, 7.6, something like that. Medium heavy titanium rod. Something you got a lot of power, fast tip, but you want to be able to feel. And this is just a shallow water swim bait. That's a live motion one here, but Trocard 3/0 weighted hook with a weighted swim bait in shallow water. You'll be able to cover a lot more water and it's going to swim a lot better for you at a right speed. That's a good one. All right. Man, what a beauty. You can see how fat she is, just full of roe. What a beautiful fish. We'll let her go. Go let her do her thing. Make plenty more. See ya, girl. Fishing this time of year, as you can see, the fish we're catching are fat. They're beautiful. They're up here. Some are spawning. Some are getting ready to spawn. They're full of eggs. This time of year is crucial. This is the reproduction time of all of the lakes, you know, around this country. You know, in a place like this, especially on Lake Guntersville, it's such a great lake to fish. It's beautiful. It's a great place to come and catch a lot of fish, but there's so much pressure here on this lake right now. This is the time of year. Come catch fish, have a blast, but make sure we let them go so they can reproduce so that our kids and grandkids can continue to come back and catch plenty of big Lake Guntersville bass.
Hey, you know, one thing to always remember about keeping bass, there's nothing wrong with catching a few keepers for the dinner table, right? But when you really think about catching a bigger bass, like the alpha dogs, 3 pounds and up, well, those are the ones you definitely, well, you want to let those go. Number one, you want those genetics in your lake for years to come after the spawn. And number two, if you really sit and think about it, eating a big bass, well, they just don't taste that good.
Shallow water swim baits, Lake Guntersville, Alabama, during the spawn. Check it out. As it warms up, as the sun gets a little bit higher, and as, you know, the fish I think are gonna slowly push up and become a little bit more aggressive, you know, we're gonna kind of go with them. And as you can see, we got a lot of lily pads right here. And when you get into heavy cover like that, a lot of the times your opportunities of catching a really big bass are in these lily pads. So I'm gonna switch up, I'm gonna change it up a little bit, same bait and everything, but with line. And line, I'm gonna throw a braided line compared to the fluorocarbon that we've been throwing. The water's been real clear. It's a little bit dirtier in here, but for the most part, I'm gonna do it because the strength of the fish that are possibly in these lily pads, I'd rather them pull on braid than fluorocarbon when I'm in here. So we're gonna switch up to a Stren 50-pound braid and see what happens. One question that, you know, we get asked a lot is what type of knot do you tie with braid? Is it a cinch knot? Is it a Palmar knot? Is it a double cinch knot? You know, I always use a double Palmar knot. I'll run it through one time because this line is so silky or, you know, slick. What happens is if you only tie one, or if you tie that cinch knot, one thing that'll happen is it slides through. So you run it through twice and then you pull it apart right there just like a normal Palmar knot. Run it through, take your tag line, and pull your tag line tight, and voila. Fishing in this area where there's a lot of lily pads, what you see is long casts that we're making. And the reason we're making long casts is because it is pretty shallow in here. Water's fairly clear, and we don't want to spook the fish. So making that long cast with 50-pound braid, the one thing that's so important with it is when you get that bite, that line goes, whether that fish goes left or right, your line is around that lily pad. And to get that hook set with no stretch in your line helps you catch more fish. There's one. See, all through those lily pads. All right. Little adjustment. That fish hit it way back in those lily pads. Wow. Fluorocarbon, I think, or mono would have had me tied up, but look at that. Another Guntersville beauty. You know, when you're fishing in these thick lily pads with this braided line, one thing with braid is it floats. Fluorocarbon sinks, so you can keep that real steady retrieve with fluorocarbon. But in these lily pads where we're at, you know, throwing this heavy braided line and making really long casts, it's pretty shallow in here, but you want to make sure that you go slow enough to where that tail's still kicking, but that bait is down in front of that fish. And a quick release, there she goes. But throwing that, you know, as you could see coming out of that real green stuff right there, I mean, that fish hit me and was going straight that way. So by the time I set the hook, if I was throwing any other line than this strand braid, I would have missed that fish. Obviously the hook still wasn't in her that good, but you know, bringing it through there, getting the no stretch, getting that hook set, was able to get that fish to the boat. Here on Lake Guntersville, we've thrown the braid and we've thrown the fluorocarbon, and it's really paid a big dividend on both sides in the areas that we were fishing. Now, as you get further south down into Florida, down into lily pads and cattails, and that's all you have, it's 100% braided line the entire time for me. And then we move up to, say, Smith Lake up in Virginia, or Smith Lake over here in Coleman, Alabama. The shallow water swim bait is still gonna work, and it's still gonna catch just the same amount of fish, but you're gonna be throwing more fluorocarbon than you are braid because you don't have near the vegetation. Here on Guntersville, we got it all. So when you're sitting there and you're fishing and you look at the situation that you're in, you look at the cove that you're in, just think to yourself, what's gonna give you the best opportunity to get the fish in the boat? If you got a lot of vegetation, nasty, gnarly stuff, you're gonna wanna throw braided line. If you're up on these rock lakes that don't have a lot of grass, throw the fluorocarbon, have fun, catch a lot of fish. Oh yeah. Look at that. Come here. Don't you? Ah, ha ha! That's what I'm talking about right here. Beautiful, fat. Look, you can see how she's red on the tail like that. Just a beautiful Guntersville bass right there. Let this one go and catch another one. So shallow water fishing in the spawn, one of the biggest things is to make sure that you have some shallow water swim bait. You want to fish pretty slow. You know, we haven't been very aggressive today. The water temperature's around 62, 63 degrees. So the bite's a little slow, but they still bite. And you just want to make sure that you keep that bait just above the grass or the shells or whatever it is you're fishing, and just let that thing swim around, and boom, they come up and get it. Whether they're coming up to bed or whether they're on a bed, this is a great way to catch a lot of fish.
Pulling an area and a mat like this, there's no holes in it, and I see frogs hopping across it, most likely there's not a bass there. They know that there's danger there. They will not go past a point. I've had it where I've actually watched a frog, follow the frog out and stop at a certain spot and then I move my frog past that, bass eats it where that frog stopped. So paying attention to simple little things like that can actually help you maximize your fishing time, because he knows if there's danger, he's not going to come back.
So many colors of different soft plastics at Bass Pro Shops. You ask yourself, well, where do I start? I'm going to show you today as we go in the zone. Hey gang, I want you to be honest with me. Are you a soft plastic junkie? Look at that person sitting next to you right now. You can admit it. I know I could admit it. If you look in my tackle box, my tackle barn, the trunk of my car, there are soft plastics everywhere. And a lot of times you ask yourself, what is the right color to use? There's so many colors to pick from. Well, a lot of times you can live by that old rule. On dark days, use dark soft plastics. On lighter days, use lighter soft plastics. And while that works, I want you to try something this year. I want you to go to your lake or your pond, and I want you to just stare at the bottom of that lake or pond. Just stare at the bottom real quick, okay? Then I want you to match your soft plastics to the bottom, okay? Look at this guy behind me right here. Look at the size of him. Look at his camouflage around him. There's a reason he got that big. And when you talk about predator and prey, especially the prey, their number one defense from big guys like this or a 10-pound bass, it's their camouflage. They have to blend in with their surroundings, or I got news, they're gonna become lunch, all right? Whether you're a crawdad, whether you're a bluegill, you have to blend in with your surroundings. So what I want you to do, get a soft plastic that if you drop it down to the bottom of the lake, you're like, wow, I can barely see that. Z-Train, how is a fish gonna see that? I got news. The predator is conditioned to kill anything that is camouflaged in its own environment. In fact, right now, I want you to look at this worm right here and pretend that's the bottom of the lake. See how it blends in with that wood? Well, I got news. If there's a 10-pound slaunch sitting next to it, game over, my friends. This year, look at the bottom of your lake, and most of all, match the bottom of your lake. Guaranteed you're gonna catch more bass. Hello everyone and welcome to the Bass Pros, the show that is teaching more anglers to fish than ever before. And do we have a great show for you today. Bassmaster Classic champion Randy Howell is going to remind us that crankbaits are not just for shallow and deep water. He's going to remind us about that middle ground as he goes in depth. Then, are you one of those anglers that you want to catch more fish on a drop shot but you're not? Well, you're going to learn how to on today's In the Zone. But first, former Classic champion Davey Height is going to show us his two-step process. First find fish, then catch fish. Here comes fishing in 5.
You know, one of the questions that I get asked an awful lot is, what do you do when you go to a new lake or a body of water that you haven't been on in a long time, and where do you start? What do you do? We're up here somewhere in Minnesota, and this is going to be a great example of what I do when I go to a body of water that I haven't been on in a long time. I haven't been here for over 2 years. Instead of going to the local tackle shop and asking for information, and a lot of times they're just trying to sell you a bait, I come out here and I trust my electronics and my instincts. And what I start doing is I start looking around. As you can see here, there's a lot of bait and some fish in the area we're at. Find an area that's got some fish, find the contour that you're trying to stay on and look for, and just cover water. Then after you do that and you start catching a few fish, that's when I'll slow down and use soft plastics and that sort of thing. I always start out throwing baits that I can cover water with. I got a DT10 on here and just covering water, trying to get around a school of fish. I think a big mistake that a lot of people make is they come out to a place that maybe they've never fished before or haven't been here in a long time, and they start fishing slow, and you just don't cover water, and heck, it may be time to go in before you actually get around some fish. So I like to know that I'm around the fish. Oh, there's one. See, I like to know that I'm around them. I'm around them. Look, he's gonna jump. Nice. You know, we can't use nets fishing Bassmaster tournaments, and I don't have one with me now. So I'm gonna have to get back there and get this one. I'm using 12-pound tests and don't want to swing these fish if you don't have to. There we go. That's the way you want to start the morning off. Beautiful smallmouth. Love it. You know, I caught one on DT10, but I know these smallmouth love jerkbait, so I'm gonna try this. I can still cover water, not quite as much as I can with the crankbait. There's another one. Boy, they're fighters. Come on in here, big guy. Woo! Yes. You know, it doesn't get much better than this. I'm a southern boy, but these brown fish, you just fall in love with them. They're just so aggressive and they're such good fighters. I'm gonna go catch another one. So I've had a couple bites on moving baits, crankbait and jerkbait, right here on this one rocky drop, and most of the time my big fish come on soft plastics, but I don't like to do that all day long. I get around a few fish, and you know, I've caught several nice ones, but then I pick up a soft plastic bait, something like this, a jig, and a lot of times I can catch the biggest fish of the day just like that. You know, I think I was probably like everyone else, grew up fishing the bank, you know, casting to the shoreline itself. But now with the electronics that we have, you can come out and you're essentially fishing the bank, because I'm fishing deep water when it comes up shallow. I'm targeting 10, 12 feet today. And you just have to trust your electronics and have good maps. Wow. It looks like I'm taking it easy with him, but he's just that strong. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. Look at that, baby. That's a football. It's football season. Wow. I won the Bassmaster Classic, the FLW Championship, in a couple angler years, but my heart's pumping. This never gets old. Awesome. You know, I love it when a plan comes together. It doesn't always happen that way, but you know, I haven't been here in several years, and you know, it's what I do everywhere I go. I get moving baits. I get, in this case, a DT10, jerkbait, a shadow wrap, shad. I'm loving it, and just search and find a depth range. And you know, pretty early on, I figured out that a lot of these bigger fish are out there, you know, 10, 12 feet, which is a long way offshore on a lake like this. And just follow your Lake Master map, just like it's your shoreline. Find that contour range that they're at and catch big ones.
You know, we always hear about shallow cranking, deeper cranking, but what about that middle zone? Well, Randy Howell's here today to remind us about that forgotten area as he goes in depth.
Fall fishing has always been the most puzzling and the most frustrating time of the year to try to consistently catch bass. Always know that there's always multiple things going on, and you just got to put the puzzle together throughout the day, and by the end of the day, if you're catching bigger fish consistently, you've done the right thing. First cast, I was trying to get the first cast out of the way so I could talk a little bit. He eat the brim right off the bass, a little one. Got one anyway. First cast. Well, we're out here today trying to do this show to show you guys how I like to fish the mid-depth crankbait range. Let me throw that little guy back. Mid-depth cranking, and that's something you don't hear a lot about anymore. You know, all the guys on tour, we all fish shallow a lot, square bills a lot. That works very effective, but everybody does that. and then the deep diving crankbaits when the fish get out deep. But a lot of times those fish are in between and they're roaming those edges kind of up and down in that 6 to 10 foot zone, and that's the zone that gets overlooked a lot with a lot of crankbait depths. But this Livingston Howler, this is the bait I won the Classic on 2014 at Lake Guntersville. But I like to throw this bait in that 6 to 10 foot zone. It dives about 9 feet deep on 12-pound fluorocarbon line. So that's what we're going to target today. We're going to show you all about every little key detail that I do to help catch fish on these type baits in that depth zone. So y'all stay tuned. Fall is a really difficult time of the year to catch fish on any lake that you go to in the country. A lot of times it's because they're suspended and they're not up there where they're usually sitting at. They're not up there on the dock or on a stump or a lay down tree, and they're not out on a brush pile or a shell bed in the 15, 20 foot depth, but you still can make them bite when you target that 6 to 10 foot zone with a good hard vibrating reaction bait like this crankbait here. Oh yeah, come on up here, big boy. So when that bait is diving, it's kind of diving down that shore and it's bumping the bottom for the first 8 feet, 9 feet deep. Most of the fish that bite it that are suspended, they're out there in that same 8 or 9 foot depth zone, but they're sitting over top of 12 feet, 15 feet of water, and they're suspended. So when that bait leaves the bottom at 8 or 9 feet, it continues to track the same depth. And the fish are looking up at the shore and they see the bait coming and they just track in behind it and get it as it's going back up, and that's where you catch a lot of those suspended fish. And you just really, a lot of times it just looks like simple bank beating, but it's not. You stay out, usually I keep my boat in 15 feet of water, and that bait comes down the drop, it comes right out in their face, and that's where they follow it up and get it. And right here, this is a prime fall shoreline right here. We just went around the point. We've got another little turn and we've got a little small channel point sticking out right here, and it's a creek channel bank. And these creek channel banks, you just look for all those little irregularities and turns. That's where you want to bring that crankbait off the bottom and it quits bouncing, and a lot of those times they'll hit it right on that edge like that. There he comes up. Look at that. So be careful. Look how skinny he is, and that's a typical fall fish, that big head, skinny body. You see that a lot on all these southern lakes right now. Heard that sound, saw the vibration, and boom, come up there and slapped at it, and he got caught. And that's a nice one there. You have to make really conscious effort when you're fishing these channel banks to make sure you make the long cast at the right angle, like a kind of a 45-degree angle, or because if you throw straight into the bank and you reel it down, it's not going to dive as fast enough to stay on that bottom all the way down. But at an angle like that, the bait gets to kind of climb down that drop off as it's coming back to the boat, and keep it in that strike zone a lot longer. And then when it leaves that drop off at the 10, 12 foot range and it starts running into that area where the fish suspend at, and that's where you get a lot of your bites. So the super long cast, 45-degree angle gets a lot more bites than straight into the bank. A little small keeper. But shad is what they're on right now. We're seeing so many shad on the graph. I changed from a brim color to the chartreuse shad or chartreuse sexy shad color. And we caught the last 2 and lost 1 on that shad color. So shad in the fall seems to be more dominant, just like crawfish in the spring. So shad is always kind of the first thing I look for in the fall pattern. Fish start transitioning from brim to shad a lot more in the fall months as the water gets out of the 90s and 80s and gets down into the 70s and 60s. That's when the shad color picks up a lot. So let the fish tell you what they want. That's the best way to figure it out. I can't believe how deep the water is down through here. There's one. That one hit it right off the drop. Feels like a pretty good one. Man, they're pulling so hard today, these fish. Got the red hook, look at that. He eat it. That's how you want them to eat that thing. That way you know you got the right color on. Right there. He was right off the drop, right as my bait quit hitting the bottom. Once again, you notice that about 2/3 of the way back to the boat. That's why you never quit reeling it. You just keep on winding it steady and stop, go just a little bit, give it just a little break, little pause here or there, and sometimes those fish that are following it key in on and grab it before it starts going up, back up toward the boat.
Hey, you know, one of the things to really pay attention to when you're crankbaiting, whether it's shallow, deep, or mid-range like Randy is today, is pay attention to the rattles in your crankbait. If you go through an area and you knock their lights out, if you just plaster them with a rattling crankbait, don't be scared to go to a silent one. Trust me, you'll be surprised. You might get a couple extra bites you otherwise wouldn't have.
Hey, we're catching big bass today in the late fall on Livingston Lures Howler Plus crankbaits. This time of the year, I'm big on having a fast retrieve reel. I use a 7:3 to 1 gear ratio. That's a fast reel. That way you can keep that bait moving quick without working so hard. And I'll pause a little, and kind of give it that little stop and go like this every once in a while. That gives that bait a chance to kind of looks like it's kind of dancing on the bottom, bouncing off stuff, especially when a fish is falling and they're suspended. If it's erratic, like it's trying to get away from that fish and it's kind of stunned a little bit, that's when you'll get a lot of those bites. So pair it up with a fast retrieve reel in the fall and you'll do a lot better with it. You see, I fished that side of the creek there for a little bit, and all of a sudden, slick calm all afternoon, pretty slow, and then the wind starts blowing. It's picking up on this other side. I immediately switched sides of the creek, made a cast across this point. It's an obvious channel point, but that wind, I believe, really turns those fish on sometimes. It breaks up that surface when a lot of those fish are just sitting there suspended, just swimming around, kind of lackadaisical, not really into biting anything. The wind turns on and everything kind of comes to life. There's a big one. The wind is your friend. That's the cliche that we always say, and it's true in the spring and it's true in the fall for sure. They come up behind it, and that's a nice one. He ain't big as I thought, but boy, he's bad. 8-9 feet deep, I'm diving, and all of a sudden it hits that 10-12 foot water, and all those fish I'm seeing on the Lowrance that are suspended, that's the ones that chase it up and bite it. That's a good 3.5 pound tournament fish. I love fall fishing when nobody else is catching them and you figure out the right depth zone and you start going in these places and you start catching one here, one there, and all of a sudden you put together a good 5 fish limit. You come in and you win some money. Livingston lure, you know, the sound is not a computer generated sound. It's an actual recording of an actual bait fish underwater. So we've got the distressed bait fish sound, which is the original sound, which is the #1 sound. Second sound you'll hear it click to is the crawfish clicking sound. That's a defensive crawfish sound. And then the third sound it'll cycle to is the shad sound, electronic bait fish shad, and that's a frenzy feeding type sound that a shad gives off. That's my favorite sound during the fall, and that's the one we caught them on here today. Really feel at that bottom. If you ever get contact with the bottom when you're offshore like this, like right here, it feels like it's a little high spot. I feel my bait starting to bump the bottom, so I really stop, move it a little bit, and it backs up a little bit. And that's when a lot of them fish will bite it if they're kind of sitting there watching or following it. That intense shad sound is pulsing down there on the Livingston. The last one a lot of those fish commit, you know, out of a reaction strike and just hit that thing. As we worked our way around these creeks today, I found later in the day the fish seem to be holding on the little inside turns of the creek channel bank. So they're kind of suspended right here because that's where a lot of bait fish are hanging. So I've started targeting that throughout the day, trying to make that crankbait run through those schools of shad on those drop-offs, on those little creek channel turns, and that's been the ticket to catch the bigger fish later in the day. There he is. That's a nice one there. Yeah, that's a really good one. Baby, that was steel. Come here. Come here. Oh, there we go. That's the way to end the day right there, boys. Nice fish right here at the end. That'll help cull that last little fish I've got if I was in the tournament today. You just got to be creative. You got to get in that 6 to 10 foot range. Fall fishing at its best. Go try it in your area. I guarantee you're going to have a good time just like we have today.
Hey, here's a fast fact for you. If you're not catching them on your favorite bait, in the grass or around the edges of the grass, what you need to do is put it down and pick up a crankbait. You need to pick up something different. If they're not biting what you're throwing, throw something else. Usually that helps.
You know, one of the most asked questions I get about drop shotting is what is the right leader length? Well, might be a little more complex than you think, and that is today's In the Zone. You know, the great thing about a drop shot is it is a bite getter. When everything else kind of slows down, you throw a drop shot, you're gonna get a lot of bites. And really, when a drop shot headed east from the West Coast, that's kind of where it originated, it was thought of as only a deep water technique. You kind of got to be in, 15 to 20 feet of water or more to get bites. Very, very untrue. A drop shot will catch them from 6 inches of water down to 60 feet of water. But probably the most asked question I've got over the last 15 years about a drop shot is, what length do I want my leader? In fact, that's probably the only asked question I get about a drop shot is, and look, if you want to stay very simple, just make a 1 foot leader. If you look at this drop shot right here, it's standard about 10 to 12 inches long. But if you really want to break it down and get phenomenal when you're fishing a drop shot, here's the best way to put it. If you look at this leader right here, and as I dangle that worm, gets a lot of action. Well, that's the leader length that I want when the water is warmer, okay? You see that right there? Ton of action out of that dream shot. Now, as the water cools down and it gets down into the mid 50s, mid 40s, that's when I'm gonna shorten that leader way, way up. In fact, this technique right here is called a zero shot. My leader length is only at about 2 inches long. So the next time you rig up a drop shot and you go out, remember this simple principle. When you are in real warm water, I want you to go to a longer leader, 10 to 20 inches. It's gonna give that worm a ton of action. As it gets colder, shorten that leader up because your worm's gonna be, well, it's gonna be dull. It's gonna be kind of neutral looking in the water column. Trust me, shorter leader, colder water, longer leader, warmer water, and you will catch a ton more fish on a drop shot this next year. Hello everyone, and welcome to, well, the best bass fishing show on TV. And what a show we have for you today. Former classic champion Edwin Evers, he's here to show us 2 ways to rig giant swim baits in Oklahoma as he goes in depth. Then, have you lost your rhythm with a jerkbait? Do you ever have any rhythm with a jerkbait? That's gonna be today's In the Zone. But first, we asked Rick Clunn, how does he know when fish are heading in to spawn, heading out from spawning, pre-spawn, post-spawn? Here comes fishing in 5.
You know, here we are in the south, mid-May. The spawn should be well over, and all these fish should now be moving out to their summer areas where you be deep crankbaiting them, but it's not happening. Why? I want to show you here on an actual map the little bit of this movement I'm talking about from, the pre-spawn, spawn, and then post-spawn. You've got this blue that's the creek channel, and you got it out here in the deeper part where it intersects another creek. That, let's say, it would be where they're staying in the winter. And then as it starts to warm and they go into that pre-spawn stage, they start moving up these creek channels, and one of the key areas that they stage in is where that creek channel cuts by that point the closest. They'll stage right there. What are they staging for? They're staging to move into these pockets and spawn. Okay, that's where they stay and spawn through the spawning cycle. And then when they finish and go into post-spawn, they will normally move back to that staging area and then move on out eventually in the early summer to where they're going to spend the summer in the deeper water. This is really the normal movement. There's some mathematics to this time of year, and the math is about how many fish or where you're fishing. What you're trying to understand, are you fishing around most of the fish in the lake? Are you fishing around just a few fish in the lake? If you come out there and fish shallow like we're doing now in the winter, you're fishing around less than 5% of the fish in the lake. The other 95% are behind you. But in pre-spawn, now that starts to change. They start to move up. But then when you get really close to spawn, now you have a hard wave moving toward the bank. And then these waves can be multiple waves over 2, 3, or 4 months. And now in that spawn, you're going to have 60, 70, 80% of fish up here where you're fishing shallow. Then when the spawn starts to slow down and we go into that post-spawn, you'll slowly start to have those fish leave. You'll have 70% up there, 60% up there, now 40% out there, and that just keeps progressing. And the whole hard part about that is how fast does it progress. And nature gives you signals when that's speeding up. Okay, if the lake is low and the water's getting hotter, then that's going to speed up. What we're fishing now, right now, though, we're fishing a high lake. And the high lake is the #1 thing that slows that down. So right now, we still probably have 50, 60 to 70% of the fish up here shallow, where normally if the lake was low, that number of fish would be deep, and now your fish are leaving you up here shallow. The other signals would be you know, again, seeing that shad spawning and knowing that's where their food is. And another one is the fish himself. You know, look at him. Is he fat, like he hadn't spawned? Or is he long and slim? Is he kind of beat up, long and slim, and that means he just finished spawning? Or is he long and slim, but starting to look healthy, means we might have been an early spawner, but now he's fattening up on all these shad. The fish will kind of tell you too, you know, hey, you know, what stage they're in. Now look at this fish, okay? It's thin, he spawned out, but he probably spawned a while back because his he's really healthy. And what he's doing is staying up here shallow, getting all his energy back, feeding on these shad and stuff. And so that's a real pretty fish already. He may have been an early spawner, we're in May, he may have been spawned in March. But he stayed shallow with this high cover and stuff to get all of his weight back. If you don't have high waters where you have that grass for the spawn, those shad normally use docks to spawn on. Especially the docks that are older, that have a lot of algae on them and stuff. Normally they will also use these floating docks because they always stay in the water, and that algae, like if the water drops off from this, that algae dies. But a floating dock goes with the water, and when they lay their eggs on it, then the eggs never go dry. So again, awareness tells you and can give you all these little signals. And for example, you know, even looking at the fish we've caught, you haven't seen any of them real fat, so you know that most of them look like they've finished spawning. There's probably a small amount still spawning, but they're slim. They're not too beat up. It looks like they were early spawners, and they're feeding on these shad, and they're getting healthy again. And as long as these shad are up here, as long as this water's high, they're going to keep feeding on these shad, and eventually the brim will spawn. So these are all signals to tell you where you should be fishing to put yourself around more fish.
You know, swim baits are deadly for catching big bass. Today, Classic Champ Edwin Evers is going to show us his 2 favorite ways to rig them as he goes in depth.
You know, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, you know, swim baits have just grown exponentially, and they've become an everyday part of my arsenal. And today I'd really like to explain to you the soft swim baits, the plastic swim baits, how I rig them, how I use them, when, where, and why. You know, some of them are going to be really good for shallow water, some of them are going to be good for deep, some of them are going to be good in between. And today I hope to dive off in that and show you some different ways I rig them and catch fish on them. So right now, I'm throwing the paddle tail just with a belly weight. The reason is I am really, really shallow. I'm sitting in 1.5 feet of water right here. So I want that belly weight. There's all kinds of little brush and grass up here. It's gonna keep my bait from getting snagged. I can reel it pretty quick to get that reaction strike. I can throw it right through these trees, right next to them. I can bump them. But it's the right swim bait for in a situation like this when it's this shallow. I choose braid on this setup because it's a shallow combat deal. You know, I need to get a really good hook set. You know, with fluorocarbon will work, and I love fluorocarbon, but I like fluorocarbon more with an open hook situation. This is a lot like swimming a jig, something like that. I don't want any stretch. I want to get a really good hook set. A lot of times I'm throwing in really heavy cover with this outfit. So I'm gonna use like a 30 or 40 pound braid and a 7.5 foot heavy action rod. There's one right there. Oh, he come off. Why you need braid? I still didn't get a hook in that fish. Golly, that's a big one. Look at that. He took my Zoom swimmer. It's completely gone. Dang it. Really important to be dead center in that bait right there. Everything in all your swim baits, whatever it is, it's so important for everything to be straight and in line, because if you're not that way, it's gonna roll, it's gonna sit to the side. So I wanna make sure that's right in line with the eye of my hook. I'm gonna set that hook on the side, and I'm gonna line it up to where that goes right up through the very middle of that bait. That bait's hollow in the middle, and you need to be sure you get in that hollow portion. You can kind of feel it. And then I bring it all the way out, I make that hole a little bit bigger, and then I'm gonna set it right there on top. So this is my shallow, heavy cover swim bait rig right there. Oh, there's a big one. Golly, literally slack lined me. I mean, I'm reeling that thing in, and it's like somebody just cut my line. Holy smokes, look at that one. Can't even see my bait. Come here, fish. Oh, look at that. He ate that thing. That is so fun. That's what I was talking about. You know, when they hit those swim baits, they just literally it's like they get a 100-yard running start, and it's a middle linebacker tackling the running back and just decleating. That's what I love about this. It's super weedless. It's a great alternative in an area where you might be swimming a jig. I can reel it really fast, trigger a bite. Awesome bait right there. And this is where I use it. I use it with braid, big 7-foot pole, and I cover a lot of water with it in shallow water situations. Next one I want to show you is this bait right here. This is a mag draft, a Mega Bass mag draft. Completely different action, completely different bait. It actually has a harness you tie on right here, has a treble hook, has a magnet in it that'll hold that hook against the belly right there. If you'll see, there's a magnet and it holds it up against the belly. Or if you want to make it a little bit more weedless, you can tuck that hook in there to make it a little bit more weedless. This is going to be a slow retrieve bait. It's got a big kick to it, just a big wide tail kick to it. You can see how thick the tail section is. It's a completely different presentation. This is where it's so critical to have that bow in your line. If your line is tight between the end of your rod and the bait, you're reeling it too fast. If you can look out there and you've got a bow in your line, that's the perfect speed. If there's one thing you guys remember from what I'm trying to teach you today, on this style bait, keep that bow in your line. Really important to get the right retrieve rate. When the fish are a little bit more sluggish, I go to this bait. When I can't get them to react, I go to this bait. In dirtier water, I go to this bait, or in colder water, I go to this bait. I've got it on a 7/6 cranking rod. I got it on a slower gear ratio reel to help me slow it down. You know, if you're going with a big one, put it on a 7/10 cranking rod or 7/6, something that'll take the weight of the bait. But you don't want it on a great big stiff rod because, again, it's a treble hook bait. What I really like about this bait also is I can get this bait down deep. You know, I can let this bait, oh, there's one right there. Holy smokes. I just let it get, I was trying to talk to you guys about getting it deep. Good night. Look at the size of this fish. Oh my goodness. It's a big one. I was trying to explain to you guys, I love this bait for getting it down deep. It's a great alternative to a crankbait or fishing bridge pilings, something along those lines, because I can get that bait down deep. Man, that's a good one. That is a good one. Isn't that fun? Look how that dorsal fin pops up right there. Beautiful fish. Thank you, girl. Made my day. Oh yeah.
A couple things to help you catch more fish on a swim bait. Number one, commit to it. A swim bait is for catching big bass, and you gotta kind of throw it more than standard lures. And number two, just tell yourself there's one behind it. A lot of times fish just follow swim baits. If you tell yourself this year, there's one behind it, every single cast, you'll catch a lot more fish.
This is another bait that I've got to have in my arsenal. I'm taking the same Zoom swimmer that we had the belly hook on, but I'm putting a lead head on it. This is a bait that, a key component to one of the baits I used to win the Kentucky Lake Bass Fest a few years ago. Caught all those giant bass on a bait just like this. I've got it rigged right now on a 1/2 ounce mustad lead head. I'll go up to a 3/4 ounce some, and sometimes a 1 ounce. Most time it's a 1/2 or a 3/4 ounce. Fluorocarbon line's a key component. Your rod, slow gear ratio reel's a key component. This bait here, I'm gonna use when I need to get below that 10-foot range. You know, I can use that mag draft when I'm, you know, I can get it down to 10, 12 feet, but when I get past that, it takes too long. I'm gonna go to a bait like this that I can let it sink all the way to the bottom and then start slow winding it in. I'll throw this bait out in 25, 30 foot of water at times, but let's go see if we can catch a few fish. There's a hump right up here in about 15, 20 foot of water. Let's reel that thing across that hump and see what happens. So I'm gonna throw that bait out there a long ways. You know, I'm throwing this on 17-pound test. I'm letting it go all the way to the bottom, and then I'm just slow reeling that in. You know, when I saw those fish, they're on the bottom. So I'm bringing it right on the bottom. When I get it back from the boat, you know, when I reel it a little bit, I'm gonna pause it and let it fall back to the bottom till my line goes slack. Oh, golly, I got it to the right depth and one clobbered it. I don't know what I got. Oh, it's a big one. Golly, look at the size of that one. Reminds me of Kentucky Lake all over again. Come here. That's what I love about that bait. Man, you hook them, you got them hooked really good. You know, so many times with crankbaits, I'm so worried about losing them. You know, this bait right here, you're gonna hook them good. Well, I say that, my bait just fell out. Man, that's a fat old fish. Good one. Key component of this is super glue. You know, you can make one of these baits last a long time, keeps it straight, keeps everything where you want it to be by squirting a little super glue right there in the head and pushing that bait right up on the front of that. And that's gonna keep it up there, keep it all straight. I use the gel type super glue, and I'm gonna let it dry just, you know, a good 30, 40 seconds. And it really is a key deal. You can't do it without super glue. The great thing about this bait is it's very subtle, very silent. This is a bait that I'm gonna have tied on when I'm out structure fishing, you know, and a lot of times I'll start out with a crankbait, maybe a worm, football jig, Carolina rig, but then I'm gonna follow it up with this swim bait. It's just a bait that's quiet, subtle, those big fish eat it. It's a great way to mop up what's left on those spots after you fished it with your other baits. Another bait I've got in my arsenal are the big ones, you know, and you look at these baits, this is a 10-inch, 9-inch, 8-inch, you think there's no way, but I've caught 2, 3 pound bass on this 10-inch swim bait, guys. Don't be afraid to throw them. There's gonna be days when they're feeding on big gizzard shad that's not too big a bait for them to bite. And I've caught them on mini fish on these baits, these big ones. You know, you think about it, you know, bass get conditioned to us fishermen. You know, we throw so many of the same size baits at them. How many of us have had them spit up a big 6, 7, 8-inch gizzard shad in your live well, or spit it up when you're out there catching them? So don't be afraid to throw these. This one here is a little bit different. This is the Mag Slow. It's got a lot thinner tail action. If you look at the difference, it's gonna have a lot more tail kick, no head wobble. This is gonna be a lot bigger tail kick and a head wobble. So 2 different instances there you might look at, you know, one for colder water, one a little bit faster than the other. One's gonna displace more water. You know, the mag draft's gonna displace more water. I'll use it more in a dingy water situation. This in a more pressured or clear water situation. But let's see if we can catch one on these. There's gonna be days that these really work, so we're gonna give it a whirl. When I go to throw these bigger baits, I upsize my reel. I moved it to a size 20 reel, 6:3 to 1 for the line capacity. To throw a bigger bait, you need a bigger spooled reel. One, to hold the bigger line, to be able to make the longer cast, but to handle the weight of that bait. So go up in a reel size, that wider spool, it makes all the difference in the world. I still have a lot of line left on there when I make that long cast. If I had a size 10 reel, you don't have any line left on there, so your gear ratio is gonna be way out of whack. You're gonna be turning it a lot faster than you need to because you're down to the bottom of the spool. So I always upsize my reels when I go to these bigger baits. There's one right there on the first cast, and it's little. There's a prime example that a big bait, that's an 8-inch swim bait. Just to give you a size, you know, that's an 8-inch swim bait and a 2.5 pound bass. So those big ones will definitely catch smaller bass. Man, he raked it too. Look what he did to tore my bait up. That's good, they'll bite it.
Oh, there you go.
When I'm fishing topwater in the fall, I always like to make a long cast. So I throw 70-pound braid, 7.5 foot pitching or flipping type rod, and so you can cast it 50 to 60 yards out as far as you can. And then your boat's so far away, the fish aren't hearing you. When they're suspended and they're real spooky like that, that's what it takes sometimes to make them bite. Put it on braid and a long rod and throw that Livingston walking boss as far as you can. And that's when you're gonna get them big ones just like this.
You know, the beautiful thing about a jerkbait is it catches them in every season. Winter, spring, summer, fall. And the number one key to jerkbait fishing is cadence. And that's what we're gonna talk today about in the zone. Hey, the great thing about these jerkbaits right here, if you walk through Bass Pro Shops, there are very few lures in our tackle box that catch them all year long. Freezing water, warm water, a jerkbait can catch them all year long. But the thing to live by with a jerkbait is rhythm and cadence, my friends. Trust me on this. When you find the right rhythm and cadence per the time of year, you generally can duplicate that all day long. And here's kind of what I've lived by my entire life is when you see guys jerkbait, the number one key to jerkbaiting is you have to throw your rod. And this is just a sample right here. Trust me, I don't use a rod this short. It's a sample I took off the reel counter. Is if you notice what I'm doing right here, I'm throwing line back at that jerkbait to get it to come to a complete stop, okay? It's almost like when you stop at a stop sign real quick and a car might bump you from behind. That's what you want to happen with a jerkbait. To get bites, it has to come to a complete stop. Now the next thing is, in the middle of summertime, if you watch guys like Edwin Evers, Kevin Van Dam, heck, when I've taped Zona shows, you can get really aggressive when you're jerkbaiting with shorter pauses, more action, keep it going, right? But as the water cools down, in fact, when the water gets downright cold, longer pauses. All right? So if you go out this year and the water's in the low 40s, the longer you can pause your jerkbait, the more you are gonna catch them. As we get into springtime, summertime, start getting more aggressive. Live by this one rule. Warm water, short pause, cold water, long pause, and you're gonna catch a lot more fish this year, jerkbait.